No Magic, Please. More Adventures of Ms. Wiz by Terence Blacker. Read by Helen Lederer. Ms. Wiz Goes Live. Chapter 1. Parent Problems. It was an evening like any other at the Smith household. Mr. Smith was in the living room reading a newspaper and drinking a can of beer. Mrs. Smith was shouting at him from the kitchen. Caroline, their eldest child, was trying to do her homework and wondering what it was about parents that made them argue all the time. And her 3-year-old sister, known to everyone as Little Musha, was in front of the television, carefully working some chocolate cake into the carpet. There was a crash of cutlery from the kitchen. "I work all day," Mrs. Smith said loudly. "And have you done the washing up when I come home? Or cooked the children's supper? Or done the hoovering? Or made the beds? Have you, heck?" "Yak, yak, yak," said Mr. Smith, taking a swig of beer. "I've been out looking for a job. I'm tired." Caroline sighed and took the remains of the chocolate cake from her little sister, who started crying. There was another crash of plates from the kitchen. "All I can say," muttered Mrs. Smith, "is that you've changed. You're not the man I married." "That's true," said Mr. Smith. "I was happy then." "Happy?" Mrs. Smith gave an angry laugh. "You've always been a miserable, useless, lazy—" "Mum," said Caroline, who knew exactly when to interrupt her parents' rows, "I'm trying to do my homework, and Musha keeps trying to turn the television on." "It's my favourite programme," said Musha. "What is?" asked Caroline. Musha thought for a moment. "Whatever's on now," she said. "Please tell her, Mum." "Stop fighting!" Their mother stamped her foot. A plate fell to the ground and smashed. There was silence for a moment. Mrs. Smith sighed. "Let her watch television, Caro," she said. "At least we get some peace that way." "What about my homework?" Mr. Smith wandered into the kitchen. "I'm going to the pub," he mumbled. "The pub?" gasped Mrs. Smith. "Why don't you both go out?" said Caroline, quickly joining them. "Great idea," said her mother tearfully. "We could go and watch a terrible film and grumble about it afterwards, or eat at a restaurant and realise we have nothing to say to one another, or just watch other people having fun in a pub." Mr. Smith put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Come on, love," he said. "Let's have an evening out. We both need a break." "And what about a babysitter?" asked Mrs. Smith. Just then the doorbell rang. Caroline opened the door. "Good evening," said a young woman with a clipboard under her arm. "I'm doing a survey for—" "Ms. Wiz!" Caroline smiled. "What on earth are you doing here?" "I'm doing a survey for—" "Hey, Mum, Dad!" Caroline shouted over her shoulder. "This is Miss Wiz, who did all the magic things at school and visited Jack in hospital and found Lizzie's stolen cat and saved the library by bringing Peter Rabbit and Frankenstein to life." "Not that witch woman," said Mr. Smith suspiciously. "Paranormal operative, actually," said Ms. Wiz. "It's not quite the same." "Can paranormal operatives babysit?" asked Mrs. Smith. "Well," said Ms. Wiz, "I'm really here to complete this survey." "What's it about, Ms. Wiz?" asked Caroline. "Something magic?" Ms. Wiz looked at the clipboard and took a deep breath. "I need to know how many windows people have in their houses, how big the windows are, if they're happy with their windows, and, if not, how they would like them changed, whether their windows go up and down, or open, sideways or slide, if they're drafty when the wind blows, whether they're made of wood or metal, how often the window cleaner comes, how much he charges, how many windows he has at home, does he wash them with a sponge or cloth or bits of newspaper, and does he whistle while he works, and—" "Boring," said little Musha. "I suppose it is rather," said Ms. Wiz. "All right, I'll babysit for you." She stepped into the house. "Are you reliable?" asked Mrs. Smith. "Reliable?" Caroline laughed. "She was a teacher. You can't be more reliable than that, can you?" Said Mr. Smith uncertainly. "Wasn't there something about her keeping a rat up her sleeve?" "That was just a rumour," said Caroline, handing her father his coat and holding the front door open for him. "You both go out and enjoy yourselves." Mumbling, Mr. and Mrs. Smith made their way out of the house. As Miss Wiz, Caroline and little Musha waved them goodbye, they were arguing as to how they should spend the evening. "Phew," said Miss Wiz, closing the front door. She pulled a rat out of her sleeve. "Can Herbert have a run now?" "Survey, eh?" said Caroline with a smile. "You knew I needed help." Miss Wiz shrugged. I go where magic's needed, she said. So what's the problem here? Caroline frowned. I always seem to be sorting things out. Musher, Mummy, Daddy. I'm only 9, but I never have any fun these days. We'll see about that, said Ms. Wiz. Herbert, the magic rat, was scurrying towards the kitchen when little Musher picked him up rather roughly. Don't like rats, she said, nose to nose with Herbert. Ms. Wiz smiled. Not even rats with miniature water pistols in their right ears? What? Said little Musher. At that moment, a jet of water squirted from Herbert's right ear, hitting little Musher in the eye. Ow! She shouted, dropping the rat and starting to cry. When little Musher cried, the glasses in the kitchen rattled, the neighbours shut their windows, and cats disappeared up trees in terror at the noise. It was like a police siren. This is little Musher, Caroline shouted to Miss Wiz. She's... Caroline remembered a phrase that grown-ups like to use when discussing her sister. She's quite a character. Little Musher, eh? Said Miss Wiz. Is that a nice Indian name? Little Musher stopped crying. I'm called Musher, she said, treading on Miss Wiz's toe, because I mush people. Her real name's Annie, Caroline explained, but she's going through a mushing phase and likes to be called Little Musher. Well, she had better not mush me, said Miss Wiz firmly. And what are we going to do tonight, Little Musher? Television. Oh, no, said Caroline. We could do amazing things now that Miss Wiz is here. She can turn people into animals, make things disappear. She can fly. Musher thought for a moment. Television, she said. See, said Caroline, no fun. What's wrong with television? Asked Miss Wiz. But we always watch. Miss Wiz held up a hand and smiled. Trust me, she said. Chapter 2. Jimmy Goes Bananas. You're getting smaller, Miss Wiz. Caroline and Miss Wiz were watching the What a Load of Show-Offs show on television when little Musher began to stare at Miss Wiz. It's true, she said. You really are getting smaller, Miss Wiz. Yes, said Miss Wiz. I'm thinking of going into television. Oh, no, said Caroline, who now saw that her sister was right and that Miss Wiz was shrinking rapidly. Don't go all small on us. You're meant to be babysitting. Miss Wiz was now slightly smaller than little Musher. You can shrink too, if you like, she said. But then what happens? Asked Caroline. We enjoy some television from inside the television set. Yeah, said little Musher. Do it, Miss Wiz. When Miss Wiz was around, the strangest things seemed normal. Within seconds, Caroline discovered that the furniture in her living room appeared to have grown to an enormous size. A fly on a wall nearby looked as big as a jumbo jet. Follow me, said Miss Wiz to Caroline and little Musher. They all climbed onto a nearby matchstick. Hold tight, shouted Miss Wiz as the sound of a low hum filled the room. The matchstick hovered above the ground and then carried the 3 of them onto the television set. What about Herbert? Asked Caroline. It's all right, said Miss Wiz. He's in my pocket, as tiny as we are. I hate Herbert, muttered little Musher, remembering the water pistol. I hope he disappears altogether. Now, how exactly are we going to get into this set? Miss Wiz was tapping the top of the television. Here we are, she said, opening a small trap-door. Some steps led into the dark inside. Little Musher gasped. Miss Wiz is going into the telly, she said. What are we going to do now? Caroline remembered that she was meant to be the responsible one. But we're not even allowed to touch the back of the television because it's so dangerous, she shouted down the steps. I don't think Mum and Dad would like it if we got right inside. Don't worry, Miss Wiz's voice echoed in the darkness. This is magic TV. Come on then, said little Musher. Caroline sighed, took her little sister's hand and stepped into the television set. Ready? Said Miss Wiz when they reached the bottom of the steps. In front of them was a large door with a notice saying, Studio 5, do not enter when the red light is on. The red light above the door shone brightly. What's the light for? Asked Caroline. It means they're making a programme, said Miss Wiz. It's probably the one we were watching. Let's go in and see. She opened the door and all 3 of them were dazzled by bright lights. And now, their voice was saying, the What a Load of Show-Off show welcomes our next contestant. As her eyes grew accustomed To the studio lights, Caroline saw a man with a funny hat, green glasses, and a yellow jersey walking towards them. "It's Jimmy," she whispered. "He's the star of What a Load of Show-Offs." "Yes," said Miss Wiz, "and we're on his show." "I want to go home," said little Musha. Jimmy took her hand and held it tightly. "Hello, little girl," he said, putting his face close to little Musha's. "And what's our name, then?" "Musha." "Musha!" Jimmy winked at the camera, which had followed him across the studio. "What a lovely name. Why do they call you that?" "Careful," Caroline murmured, but it was too late. "Because I like mushing." Little Musha reached out for Jimmy's nose and twisted it hard. "Ah!" The star of What a Load of Show-Offs hopped from one foot to the other until little Musha let go of his nose. "Ow! Isn't live television great, folks?" "Why have you got tears in your eyes?" asked little Musha. "I'll tell you after the show," said Jimmy through clenched teeth. "Come over here and play our lovely quiz game." Miss Wiz and Caroline took a seat at the back of the studio as little Musha reluctantly allowed herself to be led to a big chair. "Now, every time I say a word," said Jimmy, "you have to say another word that's a bit like it. So I say rain, and you say cloud, or sun, or wet, all right?" Little Musha nodded. Her chin was set like a boxer's before a fight. This was never a good sign. Jimmy smiled. "Now!" "Then," said little Musha. "I haven't started yet, silly." "Billy," said little Musha. "No!" "Yes." "Very funny," said Jimmy, whose face was now a bright red colour. "The first word is hair. Pull. Ice cream. Carpet. Bedtime. Scream. Toe. Stamp." "Stamp?" said Jimmy. "That's not right, is it? Now, where's the connection between toe and—" Little Musha brought her sharp little heel down hard on Jimmy's toe. "Ow!" Jimmy staggered back. "Where's a doctor? Where's my agent? Get this child out of here. I never wanted to work with children anyway. I was going to be an actor." "I think we've outstayed our welcome," said Miss Wiz quietly to Caroline. "Get your sister and follow me." "Someone take this little brute away!" Jimmy was shouting. Caroline hurried forward and grabbed Musha. "That was fun," said little Musha. "Maybe for you," said Caroline, dragging her out of the studio. "For me, it's home from home. Now come on." Miss Wiz was waiting for them at a door marked Exit. "Don't like Jimmy," said little Musha as they hurried out of the studio. Miss Wiz sighed. "I don't think he's wild about you either," she said. Chapter 3. No autographs, please. "No, of course you're not a little brute," said Caroline, holding Musha's hand as they hurried along a brightly lit corridor. "Is she, Miss Wiz?" "Certainly not," said Miss Wiz. "Where are we going to now?" asked little Musha. "Let's try and find a programme with a bit less violence," said Miss Wiz. "If we go on like this, we could get banned from the television." Caroline had an idea. "Maybe I could—" "Hey!" shouted little Musha as they turned a corner. "Cartoons!" "Oh, forget it," sighed Caroline. Ahead of them, standing outside a studio door, sipping tea, were two cartoon characters, a cat and a mouse. Little Musha gasped. "It's Tom and Jerry," she said. Tom, the cartoon mouse, gave a weary smile. "No autographs, please," he said. "Not when we're resting between takes." "I thought that Jerry and you were meant to be enemies," said Caroline. "On television, you're always chasing each other about and hitting one another over the head." "Don't believe everything you see on the screen," said Jerry. "We're enemies when the cameras roll, but in real life we're buddies." "Real life?" Caroline smiled. "But you're cartoon characters." "Hey, lady," said Tom, putting on his well-known frown. "Don't knock cartoons, please. Like this evening, we're rehearsing a scene where Jerry's playing golf. He rolls me up into a little ball and wallops me 300 yards. I bounce off a tree, rebound off a passing seagull, catch Jerry in the stomach and flatten him against a wall, which then collapses on top of him." "You rehearse that?" asked Caroline. "How else do you think we get it right?" said Jerry. "Magic?" "The producer says we could use stand-ins, but we like to do our own stunts," said Tom. "Talking of which, it's time for me to run Jerry over with a steamroller." Jerry winked. "Showbiz," he said. "Don't you just love it?" "Can I come?" asked little Musha. "No," said Miss Wiz and Caroline at the same time. Musha took a deep breath, sniffed a couple of times, and burst into tears at maximum volume. A woman hurried down the corridor towards them. "Shh!" she went. "How can we make television programmes with that terrible din? We've already had a disaster tonight with Jimmy throwing a tantrum on the What a Load of Show-Offs show." "Oh dear," said Miss Wiz, trying to keep a straight face. "We wouldn't know about that. We're just here on a visit." "And what exactly are you here to see?" asked the woman. Caroline put up a hand. "I was hoping—" "We're looking for a really nice show," Miss Wiz interrupted. "Nice?" The woman scratched her head. "There's not much demand for that these days. I suppose you could try our new series, Wild, Woolly and Really Interesting. They're doing a programme on extinct species at the moment, downstairs in Studio 9B. The red light outside Studio 9B was shining brightly, and there was a sign on the door which said, "Quiet. Extinct animals do not disturb." "What does extinct mean?" asked little Musha. "It means that they're the type of animals that no longer exist in the world," said Caroline. "How can they be disturbed then?" "I think it's a sort of television joke," said Miss Wiz, gently pushing the studio door open. "Wow," said Caroline. Studio 9B had been decorated like a jungle, full of trees and creepers and the sound of exotic birds. In the centre of the studio, a big man with a beard was talking breathlessly in front of a camera. "And so," he said, "over literally hundreds of centuries, species changed, evolved and adapted to the world's environment. If they hadn't changed, many of them have perished, died out, become extinct, like—" The man walked across the studio to where a model of a strange-looking animal stood. "Like Tyrannosaurus rex." "Why aren't the animals moving?" whispered little Musha. "Because they're extinct," said Caroline. A faint humming noise was coming from Miss Wiz. "I wonder if this programme needs livening up," she said. "And then," the bearded man continued, "there's the dodo, a bird that died almost 200 years ago." He walked to where Miss Wiz stood. "Here we have a stuffed model of the dodo. As you can see, it's very, very dead and extinct." At that moment, the dodo put its head on one side and pecked at something on the studio floor. "Now, that's really rather strange," said the bearded man nervously. "Extinct animals don't usually move like that." The dodo flapped its wings and flew onto a branch. "Very odd," said the television presenter, scratching his beard. "The dodo can't fly, or couldn't fly. I think I must be dreaming." "Off you go, Herbert," muttered Miss Wiz, releasing the magic rat from her sleeve. Herbert stood on her arm, then spread his front legs and started to fly, like a small bird. After circling around Miss Wiz a couple of times, he flew across the studio. The bearded man was climbing the tree towards the dodo when he noticed Herbert, hovering delicately a few inches away from his nose. "Good gracious me!" he said with a hint of panic in his voice. "This looks very like a type of hummingbird, except it's a wat. It's a sort of humming wat." He sat down heavily on a branch. "I must be ill. I'm seeing things," he said. "Turn the waddy cameras off." "Cut!" The loud shout came from a man in shirt sleeves who was now hurrying across the studio. "What on earth's going on?" he asked. "The dodo was alive," said the bearded man weakly. "Then I was buzzed by a humming wat." "The dodo?" The man in shirt sleeves looked up at the tree, where now the stuffed dodo was standing lifelessly. "Who put it up there?" "It flew," moaned the bearded man, "and then I saw a humming wat." "Come on," said Miss Wiz, quietly putting Herbert up her sleeve. "I think it's time for us all to leave the jungle." "So why don't you magic lots of extinct animals back to life?" Caroline asked after they had crept out of Studio 9B. "I'd love to see a real live dinosaur." "My spells don't last that long," said Miss Wiz. "A few minutes at the "Excuse me," said a woman, hurrying down the corridor towards them. "Are you the replacement newsreader?" "Newsreader?" said Miss Wiz. "Ah, yes, that's me." "Andrew, our normal reader, has a terrible cold and has completely lost his voice," said the woman. "You're on the air in 5 minutes, so you'd better all follow me." "News?" said Caroline. "I thought we were here for fun." "We are," said Miss Wiz. "I think this could be tremendous fun. But what about—" "Right," said Miss Wiz, turning to the woman. "Where's my studio?" she said. Chapter 4. Good News for Really Nice People. It's coming up to 10 o'clock, and in a few seconds' time we'll be going over to the newsroom for the news, read by Dolores Wisdom. Caroline and little Musha sat in a small room next door to where Miss Wiz was about to read the news, and watched her through a big window between the two rooms. Beside them sat the producer, who was looking very nervous. "She has done this before, hasn't she?" he asked Caroline. "Probably," said Caroline. "Because once she's started, we can't interrupt her, you know," warned the producer. "This is going out live." "I'm sure she'll make it really entertaining," said Caroline. "Entertaining?" The producer looked more worried than ever. "I just want her to read the words on the little screen in front of her." He looked at a clock on the wall. "Cue Miss Wisdom," he said, holding his hand up. "Good evening," said Miss Wiz, wearing her most serious expression and reading the words in front of her. "It's 10 o'clock, and here are the news headlines. There's been a plane crash in Italy. The economy is looking worse than ever. The government says it's everyone else's fault. More wind and rain are forecast throughout the country. A famous actor has died, and—" Miss Wiz hesitated for a moment and said, "This is all a bit depressing, isn't it?" "Hang on," said the producer next door. "Depressing? That wasn't in the script." "You can hear all the gloomy news somewhere else," said Miss Wiz with a smile. "In the meantime, here's the good news for really nice people. Mr. and Mrs. Smith of 91 Elm Tree Road went out tonight and had a very enjoyable time." "What?" said the producer. "Has she gone mad?" "This," continued Miss Wiz, "after a grim start to the evening, during which Mrs. Smith called Mr. Smith miserable and lazy, and then broke a plate." "How did she know that?" asked little Musha. "Listening at the door, probably," said Caroline. "But all has ended well, with the Smiths enjoying some fish and chips, just like the old days, followed by a romantic walk in the park. Their children, Caroline and Musha, have been shrunk by the babysitter." The producer was now standing in front of the window and waving wildly at Miss Wiz, who waved back before going on with the news. "Rats are getting nicer," it was officially announced tonight, "and we have a rat spokesperson with us in the studio." Miss Wiz pulled Herbert the rat out of her sleeve. "So, Mr. Herbert," she said, "why have you rats suddenly decided to clean up your act?" "Basically," said Herbert, looking towards the camera, "we're tired of the bad publicity. People say we're unfriendly, dirty, and spread diseases, and frankly, at the end of the day, this is not what we're about." "And so what will you be doing about it?" "First of all, we'll be cleaning our teeth," said Herbert. "There's no doubt that bright yellow teeth in a rat gives a very bad first impression. Then we'll be taking baths every day, and generally coming out of the closet and joining family life, rolling playfully around on the carpet, playing with the kids and so on." "What about cats?" asked Miss Wiz. "That's still a bit of a grey area," said Herbert, "but we hope to negotiate a peace settlement with them very soon." "Thank you, Mr. Herbert," said Miss Wiz, opening her sleeve so that he could return home. "That's really nice news." "I've heard enough," said the producer, getting to his feet. "I'm going to shut that woman up and read the news myself." "And there's also good news for paranormal operatives," Miss Wiz was saying when the producer walked briskly into the news studio. He was just about to lift Miss Wiz out of her chair when viewers throughout the country heard a faint humming noise. There was a flash of smoke, and there, in the place of the producer, stood a panda, blinking its eyes in the studio lights. "We've just received a late news flash," said Miss Wiz. "A television producer has been turned into a panda. As everyone knows, the panda is a threatened species. In fact," Miss Wiz pulled the panda's ear, "I'm threatening this one right now." The panda slunk miserably out of the studio. "Can I have a ride?" asked little Musha, climbing onto its broad back as it returned to the control room. "As I was saying," Miss Wiz smiled at the camera, "the good news for paranormal operatives is that the word witch is to be banned from dictionaries. I asked a well-known paranormal operative, me, why the ban was necessary. Well, I answered myself, the word witch suggests to a lot of people that to be magic you have to be an ugly old woman with cobwebs in your hair. This, of course, isn't true. Why not? I asked. Because, I replied, magic belongs to all ages, and to men as well as women, although between me and me, women are rather better at it. Thank you, Miss Wiz, said Miss Wiz. "This is getting very strange," said Caroline. Finally, news of a really nice record achieved today. Little Musha Smith of 91 Elm Tree Road has stayed up after 10 o'clock and only burst into tears once. "We're really proud of her," said Sister Caroline. "Apart from pulling Jimmy's nose and then stamping on his foot, she has been an angel." "Hey, Musha," Caroline called out, "you're on the news." But little Musha was too busy riding the panda to pay any attention. "Typical," sighed Caroline. Chapter 5. A Lovely Perf. For a girl who had spent the evening inside her parents' television set with her favourite paranormal operative and a little sister who was now behaving quite well, Caroline was feeling surprisingly sad. "Hey-ho," Miss Wiz was saying as they wandered along yet another corridor. "I really enjoyed that." "You did seem to be having quite a lot of fun," said Caroline pointedly. "Just like little Musha had quite a lot of fun earlier. Almost everyone has been having fun." Miss Wiz smiled. "Anyway," she said, "we'd better head back to the real world. Your Mum and Dad will be home soon." "I'm going to tell them about pulling Jimmy's nose," said little Musha. "What about my news reading?" Miss Wiz laughed. "I always wanted to do that. The producer was quite upset about it." "He'd still be galumphing about as a panda if I hadn't reminded you to turn him back into a producer," said Caroline quietly. "Yes, thank goodness you were there," said Miss Wiz. "I'm always there," said Caroline grumpily. "It's just like home in this television set. I keep Musha out of trouble. I even have to sort things out when the great Miss Wiz is having a good time. Why have I always got to be sensible and grown up? When is it my turn to enjoy myself?" Miss Wiz gave a little smile as they walked past a door marked Green Room. "That's where the actors rest," she said. "Hey, you like acting, don't you, Caroline? Would you like to see if there's anyone there?" Caroline shrugged. "If you like," she said. Miss Wiz opened the door to reveal a man and a woman in Victorian costume. They both were pacing backwards and forwards and seemed rather upset. "Wow," whispered Caroline. "It's Nigel Triffrell and Dulcimer Detrow, the famous actors." "What have I always said?" Nigel was clasping his brow. "Never agree to act with children or animals." "And that ghastly little Jane was a bit of both," said Dulcimer, fanning herself with a copy of The Stage. "Very droll, darling," said Nigel. "What appears to be the trouble?" asked Miss Wiz. The two actors turned to them without showing the least surprise. "Only that the little brute of a small girl who was supposed to appear in the last episode of Heritage, our wonderful costume drama, has got tonsillitis," said Dulcimer. "Tonsillitis! Ha!" cried Nigel, with a dismissive wave of the arm, "otherwise known as stage fright." "Why don't I do it?" said Caroline. Nigel and Dulcimer looked at her in amazement. "Are you a thesp?" asked Nigel. "A what?" Nigel sighed with impatience. "Do you tread the boards?" he said. "If you mean, does she act," said Miss Wiz, "the answer is yes, brilliantly." "Saved!" cried Dulcimer. "Here are your lines." She gave Caroline a script. "Are you a quick learner?" Caroline gulped. Quite," she said nervously. "The part you play is of a scruffy little chimney-sweep girl who turns out to be the Duchess of Portland," said Nigel. "Just be yourself, darling." "We're on in 5 minutes," said Dulcimer, grabbing Caroline's hand. "I'll take you to make-up and we can learn the lines together." "Why is Caroline all dirty?" asked little Musha a few minutes later, as she and Miss Wiz watched Heritage on a small television in the green room. "Shh," said Miss Wiz, sitting nervously on the edge of her seat. "I think she's the best chimney sweep I've ever seen on television." At that moment, the camera closed in dramatically upon Caroline's face. "You mean," she said as tears welled up in her eyes, "you mean that I'm your daughter?" "Welcome home," said Dulcimer with a dazzling smile. As Nigel, Dulcimer and Caroline embraced, the theme music for Heritage swelled up behind them. "Did Caroline do well?" asked little Musha. "She was astonishing," said Miss Wiz, dabbing her eyes. Moments later, the door to the green room was flung open and the 3 actors entered. "A star is born," announced Dulcimer. "Caroline, you were wonderful, darling. Wasn't she wonderful, Nigel?" "Lovely perf," said Nigel, adding with a hint of sulkiness, "I didn't think I was bad, either." "You were wonderful too," said Caroline. Miss Wiz looked at a nearby clock. "Never mind the wonderful darlings," she said. "If we don't hurry, your parents will be returning to an empty house." "What about my clothes?" asked Caroline. "Here they are," said Miss Wiz. "There's no time to take the soot off your face." Caroline wriggled out of her clothes. "Bye, Nigel and Dulcie," she said breathlessly. "That was definitely the best fun I've ever had." "Cheery-bye, darling," said Nigel. Dulcimer gave Caroline a kiss. "Will we be able to work together again soon?" she asked. "I hope so," said Caroline. Miss Wiz, Caroline and little Musha ran as fast as they could down a long corridor. "What about Herbert?" gasped Musha. "I thought you didn't like rats," said Caroline. "Poor Herbert, left alone in television land." "Don't worry," shouted Miss Wiz. "I've got him." They ran up the stairs and through a trapdoor at the top. "Home," said little Musha, as once again they stood on top of the Smiths' television set. Just then they all heard the sound of a key turning in the front door. "Quick, Miss Wiz," said Caroline. "Get us back to our normal size before my parents come in." There was a humming noise from the direction of Miss Wiz, and the next thing Caroline and little Musha knew, they had fallen in a heap on the living-room floor. Everything in the room appeared to be back to normal. "Well," said Mrs. Smith, looking at the tangle of bodies on the floor. "Still up at 11 o'clock? I don't call that very good babysitting." "We couldn't sleep," said Caroline. "I thought that because tomorrow's Saturday it wouldn't matter too much." "It doesn't," said Mr. Smith, putting his arm around his wife's waist. "We've had a good time, so why shouldn't you?" "Caroline," said Mrs. Smith, "your face is absolutely filthy. What have you been doing?" Just then the telephone rang. Mr. and Mrs. Smith looked at one another in surprise. "Hello," said Mrs. Smith into the phone. "Yes? Brilliant. I see. Could you call tomorrow after I've discussed it with her and her father?" "Who was it?" asked Mr. Smith. "It was a television producer," said Mrs. Smith, looking puzzled. "He told me he thought Caroline was so good in something called Heritage, he wanted her to act in other programmes." "Perhaps you ought to tell him about it, Miss Wiz," smiled Caroline. "Miss Wiz," gasped little Musha, "you're getting smaller." "Oh, no," said Caroline. "Don't leave me to explain it all." Miss Wiz winked. "Whenever magic is needed, I'll be back," she said with a smile at Caroline. "Magic and fun." "I can't believe my eyes," said Mr. Smith. "She's really tiny now," said little Musha. There was a little pop, like a bubble bursting, and Miss Wiz had disappeared. For a moment, the Smith family stood in silence. "Could you kindly tell us what's been going on?" said Mrs. Smith finally. "It's a long story," said Caroline, "and I think you had better sit down first." Wiz Banned. Chapter 1. A friend in need is a friend indeed. Just because you can do a few magic spells, and fly, and turn people into animals now and then, it doesn't make life any easier. Sometimes being a paranormal operative can be really hard work. "Yes," said Miss Wiz, putting the telephone on to boil. "Being magical is no bowl of cherries, that's for sure." She was in her flat and had a tough day ahead of her, doing her homework, learning new spells and revising the old ones. Then there was the housework. Miss Wiz looked at the list of things she had to do, which she had pasted up on a notice board in her kitchen. It read, 1. Tell the vacuum cleaner to do the bedroom. 2. Put a washing and ironing spell on a pile of dirty clothes. 3. Speak roughly to the duster about the bookshelves which haven't been touched for weeks. "Flats don't clean themselves, you know," she said to Herbert, the magic rat, who was asleep in the corner. "You can help me by cleaning out your cage right now." Herbert twitched his nose and went back to sleep. "Just a quick cup of tea," Miss Wiz said to herself. "Then I'll get on with those spells." She glanced at the telephone and sighed. It was true what people said. A watched telephone never boils. Just then the teapot rang. "Hello?" said Miss Wiz, picking up the lid. You won't remember me," said a man's voice from the teapot, "but I'm a school inspector. We met once at St. Barnabas School." Miss Wiz smiled. The last time she had seen the school inspector, he had been running across the playground without his trousers on after Herbert the rat had run up his left leg. "Of course I remember you," she said. "We have a bit of a crisis here," said the school inspector. "I wouldn't have called you, but you're my last hope. We need your help." "Tell me about the crisis," said Miss Wiz. "Well," said the school inspector, "it all began at yesterday's morning assembly." It had all begun at yesterday's morning assembly. The highlight of assembly at St. Barnabas was when the head teacher, Mr. Gilbert, spoke about his thought for the day. This lasted for 5, or if it was a particularly big thought, for 10 minutes, and could be about any important subject. One day the thought might be, "A friend in need is a friend indeed," or "Great oaks from little acorns grow," or "Neighbours, everybody needs good neighbours." The children of Class 3 liked Mr. Gilbert's thought for the day. It gave Katrina the chance to finish the homework she should have done the previous evening. Her friend Podge used those few minutes to eat a couple of chocolate biscuits he had brought in his pocket, and Podge's friend Jack, who always went to bed too late, could catch up on some sleep. But yesterday, the day of the crisis, Mr. Gilbert's thought had been most unusual. "I think," he said, "I think I'm going to be sick." Because so many of the children were busy doing their homework, or eating, or sleeping, no one paid much attention. But then Mr. Gilbert sat down heavily on one of several empty chairs in the front row. At that moment, Miss Peters leapt to her feet and said quickly, "Now, children, until Mr. Gilbert feels better, we'll sing our favourite song, Lord of the Dance." She sat down at the piano and with a brave smile began to sing, "Dance, dance, wherever you may be." "He won't be doing much dancing," whispered Katrina to Podge, as the head teacher tottered down the aisle and out of the door. "Who's going to run the school now? Miss Gomez, Mrs. Hicks and Mr. Williams are all ill too." "Perhaps we'll all be sent home," said Podge when he had finished his biscuit. "Otherwise they'll all have to be sent home," the school inspector said to Miss Wiz the next day. "We need someone to run the school for a week. We're desperate." "You want me to be the head of St. Barnabas?" Miss Wiz could hardly believe her ears. "And we need other teachers too," said the school inspector. "Leave it to me," said Miss Wiz. "Your crisis is over." "And, Miss Wiz," the school inspector sounded embarrassed, "may I make one small request?" "Of course." "Go easy on the magic, all right?" Miss Wiz sighed. Why was it that people were so nervous about a few spells these days? "Trust me," she said. At the next morning's assembly, the children of St. Barnabas noticed that there was a stranger sitting in the head teacher's chair. She wore a dark suit, a black gown, and had a funny square hat on her head. "She doesn't look much fun," Caroline whispered to Katrina. "Come back, Mr. Gilbert, all is forgiven," said Katrina. The woman stood up and said quietly, "Good morning, children. My name is Miss Wisbrovich. I'm Mr. Gilbert's replacement. I'd like to introduce you to my 2 assistants who are here to help me this week." From the front row, a small, neat woman in glasses and an older grey-haired man stepped forward and stood on each side of her. The new head teacher took off her hat, shook her head, allowing long, dark hair to fall on her shoulders. Then she started clicking her fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, she said. To the astonishment of everyone in assembly, the woman's 2 assistants started clapping their hands in time. "What on earth?" muttered Jack, who for the first time in living memory was awake during assembly. Suddenly the head teacher began to talk, or rather to sing. "Morning, everybody, get into that beat. Listen to me, children, and tap those feet." "I don't believe it," said Katrina. "The head teacher's doing a song," said Podge. "It's morning assembly and your feet's a-tappin' as you hear your new head teacher a-rappin'." Now the grey-haired man joined in, singing, "My name's Mr. Warlock, now listen to me. I'm here to teach you some geography." "A rap song," said Jack, his jaw sagging, "at St. Barnabas morning assembly." The other teacher stepped forward. "I'm Miss Enchanter, but don't be afraid. I'll show you how magic potions are made." "Magic potions?" Caroline smiled. "That must be it. When things get this strange, there can only be one person behind it." "Of course," said Podge. "Look at the black nail varnish on the head teacher's hands." Soon the whole of Class 3 were clapping in time to the song. The head teacher smiled, pointed the fingers of both hands at the children and sang, "So, kids, I'm here to teach you the biz. You know me, my name's Miss Wiz!" shouted everyone in Class 3. Outside the school hall, the school inspector listened. He had a busy day ahead, but was just calling by to see that the new head teacher was settling in all right. From the sounds coming from assembly, she seemed to be getting on well, even if it was a bit noisy. "Phew," he said, glancing at his watch. "At least there's no magic around." Chapter 2. Travel broadens the mind. No magic? The children of Class 3 who clustered around Miss Wiz after assembly were shocked by the news she brought them. "What about Herbert the rat?" asked Caroline. "And flying around the classroom on your vacuum cleaner?" asked Katrina. "And turning teachers into warthogs?" asked Jack. Miss Wiz held up her hands for silence. "The school inspector has invited me to St. Barnabas on condition that there's no magic," she said. The children groaned. "Why?" asked Katrina. "Because spells make grown-ups nervous, that's why," said Miss Wiz, putting on her square hat. "So, I'm going to be a serious head teacher." "Who's in charge of Class 3 this week?" asked Caroline. "Mr. Williams is off sick." "I've given you Mr. Warlock," said Miss Wiz. "I think you'll find him very interesting, but this is his first teaching job. Can I depend on you to be nice to him?" "You can depend on us," said Jack. "We're Class 3. "That's what worries me," said Miss Wiz. "Is it true that you're a wizard, sir?" "Jack," hissed Caroline, "remember what Miss Wiz said." Mr. Warlock stood at the door of the classroom and stared in amazement at Class 3. "Excuse me for asking," Jack continued, ignoring Caroline. "It's just that I've got a book at home called Witches, Warlocks and Other Weird Creatures." Katrina put up her hand. "And the other new teacher's called Miss Enchanter," she said. "Nicola Chanter, yes," said Mr. Warlock. "Enchanter, that means that she enchants, doesn't it?" Mr. Warlock took off his glasses, laid them on the desk, and looked at Class 3 very seriously. "I don't know what you're all talking about," he said. "I'm just as normal as any other teacher." "Which isn't very normal," murmured Jack. "All right," said the new teacher. "Answer your names, please." He read out the register. There was only one person missing, and that was Carl, the youngest boy in the class. "Carl's always late," said Lizzie. "He probably thinks it's a Saturday." The teacher frowned and made a note of Carl's name. "Now, today we're going to do some geography," he said, unrolling a map of the world that he had brought with him and pinning it onto the blackboard. "Who likes geography?" There was silence from Class 3. "Learning map signs," muttered Podge. "Discovering the difference between an isthmus and a peninsula. That's really interesting, isn't it?" Mr. Warlock looked surprised. "Well," he said, reaching into his briefcase, "I think you'll like it after today." He laid a box on his desk and took out 3 darts. "Who knows the capital of Norway?" he asked. Caroline put up her hand. "Oslo," she said. Mr. Warlock gave her a dart. "And the highest mountain in the world?" Jack put up his hand. "Mount Everest," he said. Mr. Warlock gave him a dart. "And who can give me the name of a major European city where there are no pedestrian crossings?" There was silence. Mr. Warlock smiled and put up his hand. "Venice," he said, "because all the streets are canals." He gave himself a dart. "Well done, Mr. Warlock," he said. "This is a normal teacher," muttered Jack under his breath. "Now, the 2 children with darts should come to the front of the class and throw them at the map," said Mr. Warlock. Caroline went to the front and threw her dart. Then Jack did the same. The teacher was about to throw his dart when Katrina asked, "What's this got to do with geography, sir?" Mr. Warlock looked surprised. "Didn't I tell you?" he said. "I'm taking you on a field trip to the most interesting place one of the darts lands on." Caroline looked at where her dart had stuck in the map. "Mine's in Milton Keynes," she said, "and Jack's is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean." "Oh dear, that's not very interesting," said Mr. Warlock. He threw his dart, which made an odd humming noise as it flew through the air. "Where did it land, Caroline?" he asked. Caroline looked closely at the map. "On a small island called Sombrero," she said. "It's in the Caribbean Ocean." Mr. Warlock smiled. "That's more like it," he said. "I still don't see what's wrong with Milton Keynes," muttered Podge, but no one was listening. It wasn't that Carl meant to be late for everything. It was just that things were always happening to him that didn't happen to other people. On this particular morning, for example, a cat followed him down the street. Since he was going towards a main road, he had to take the cat back to where he'd first seen it, but then the cat followed him again. He took it back. On his third trip, carrying the cat back, its owner came out of the house and thought Carl was trying to steal it. It took quite a long time to explain the problem, by which time Carl was late for school yet again. Nervously, he knocked on the head teacher's door. "Come in," said a voice from inside. Carl was surprised to find a woman sitting at Mr. Gilbert's desk. She was playing chess with a rat. "I was looking for Mr. Gilbert," he said. The woman smiled. "I'm head teacher for this week," she said. "You can call me Ms. Wiz." "Ms. Wiz?" said Carl, who had only come to St. Barnabas that term. "I've heard about you. You're the person who appears whenever a bit of magic's needed, aren't you?" "That's right," said Miss Wiz. "Now, what's the problem?" Carl took some time to explain why he was late for school. "I went to my classroom, but no one seems to be there," he said. "Really?" Ms. Wiz looked concerned. "All I could find was a notice on the blackboard," Carl said. "It read, 'Gone on a field trip to the sunny tropical island of Sombrero, back soon.' What could that mean?" "I think," said Ms. Wiz, who had gone quite pale, "that it means I'm in dead trouble." Chapter 3. Ask no questions, hear no lies. "I knew it," said Miss Wiz, as she hurried across the playground with Carl running behind her. "I knew those two would start casting spells as soon as my back was turned." "Which two?" Carl asked. "Mr. Warlock and Miss Enchanter," said Miss Wiz. "They're both paranormal operatives. Magic is as natural to them as flying." "As flying?" Carl frowned. "But why didn't you just tell them to be normal?" he asked. "After all, you are head teacher. They're supposed to be able to boss people around." Miss Wiz groaned. "I'm just not the bossing kind, I suppose," she muttered. When they arrived at Class 3's empty room, Miss Wiz went straight to the map on the blackboard and pulled out 3 darts that were sticking into it. "Oh no," she said. "Warlock's been using his magic darts, and he's left them behind. Heaven knows how he'll get Class 3 back here again." Carl was looking at Class 3's lockers. "They won't be here for lunch anyway," he said. "They've taken their lunch boxes." Ms. Wiz sighed. "We'd better go and see Class 4, she said. "I don't trust Miss Chanter either." As they entered the classroom next door, Carl couldn't help noticing that there was an unusual number of pet rabbits hopping about the room. "Wow," he said. "I never knew Class 4 kept rabbits." Miss Chanter smiled and looked around the room. "The class don't keep rabbits," she explained. "They are rabbits. If they can't spell properly, I'm turning them into—" "No, no, no," shouted Miss Wiz suddenly. "No magic, no spells, no rabbits, no potions, no broomsticks. I've already lost Class 3 to a sunny tropical island. Turn these rabbits back into children immediately." Grumbling, Miss Enchanter uttered a spell. Before Carl's astonished eyes, the rabbits became children once more. "That's better," said Miss Wiz. "From now on, Miss Chanter, it's the 3 R's for Class 4. Reading, writing, and—" "Rabbiting about?" suggested Jamie, a small red-haired boy sitting at the back of the class. "No," said Miss Wiz. "Responsibility. I expect you all to be responsible while I try to get your friends in Class 3 back from the other side of the world." "Well, really," said Miss Enchanter, after Miss Wiz and Carl had left the room. "She used to be such fun before she was head teacher." "It's always the same," said Jamie. "Class 3 get the excitement and we get the telling off." "Yeah," the rest of the class joined in. "It's really unfair, miss." The teacher scratched her head thoughtfully. "Perhaps I could take you on a trip around town," she said. "We've seen the town," said Mary, who was sitting beside Jamie. "We live here." "Yes," said Miss Enchanter, "but have you seen it from the sky?" Miss Wiz had the nastiest surprise imaginable when she returned to the office with Carl. The school inspector was waiting for her. "Good morning to you, Miss Wiz," he smiled. "I was just passing by and I thought I'd look in to see how you were getting on." Quite well, thank you," said Miss Wiz nervously. "Everything's going Swimmingly. And who's our young friend here? The school inspector asked, nodding in Carl's direction. He's in Class 3 with Mr. Warlock, said Miss Wiz. They've gone on a field trip, said Carl quickly. The school inspector nodded. Where to? He asked. Miss Wiz had turned quite pale. Then she straightened her back and said, I cannot tell a lie. Mr. Warlock appears to have taken them to Sombrero. And where precisely is Sombrero? There was another silence, during which the clock in Mr. Gilbert's office could be heard ticking. It's a small island in the Caribbean, said Miss Wiz weakly. It was at this moment that Carl saw something out of the office window which attracted his attention. Miss Enchanter was opening a door, and a flock of pigeons was following her into the sunlight. One of them was the same colour red as Jamie's hair. Are you telling me that an entire class has disappeared to the other side of the world? There was a hint of panic in the school inspector's voice. Am I to understand that there has been magic on these premises in spite of my specific instructions? Miss Wiz nodded miserably. The school inspector leapt to his feet. Right, that's it, he cried. Rats up trouser legs are one thing, disappearing children quite another. I'm calling the police, and then I'm going to the town hall. I'll get you banned for life. Now, please pack your things and go. You will not be allowed back on the premises. But, sir, said Carl, how are you going to get Class 3 back if you ban Miss Wiz? The school inspector looked at Carl as if he were about to swat him like a fly. There are such things as aeroplanes, he said nastily. After he had left, Miss Wiz slumped into her chair. I should never have agreed to be a head teacher, she groaned. Magic and a sense of responsibility don't seem to go together. Oh, well, said Carl, anxious to cheer her up. At least he didn't see the pigeons. Miss Wiz looked up sharply. Pigeons? Did you say pigeons? They just walked out of Class 4's door and flew off, said Carl. Miss Wiz had buried her face in her hands and was making an odd moaning sound. Let's just hope they're homing pigeons, said Carl. The sun shone brightly on the lovely tropical island of Sombrero. The waves of the bright blue Caribbean lapped softly on the white sand, and a gentle breeze carried the sound of calypso guitar across the beach. It was certainly the best field trip that Class 3 had ever been on. Katrina and Caroline sat under a palm tree, listening to a man playing a guitar, fanning themselves with their exercise books. Jack had found a skateboard ramp nearby and was showing the local children some tricks. Podge had cracked open a coconut and was using the top of his pen as a spoon. Lizzie was collecting seashells, and the rest of the class were paddling in the waves. Anyone got the time? Asked Mr. Warlock, sleepily sipping an orange drink through a straw. We must remember to get back home before tea time. Haven't you even got a watch? Said Lizzie as she inspected a starfish. Must have left it at home in my case, said Mr. Warlock. It's probably with the magic darts. So, how are we going to get home then? Asked Lizzie. That's just what I was wondering, yawned Mr. Warlock sleepily. I expect Miss Wiz knows the spell. Chapter 4. Look Before You Leap. One of Mr. Gilbert's favourite thoughts for the day was, when one door closes, another one opens. If Miss Wiz had been asked for her thought for this particular day, it might have been, when one door closes, the ceiling falls down on your head, or just when you think things can't get worse, they do, or help, get me out of here. Class 3 had disappeared to the other side of the world. Class 4 had taken wing and were flying around in the clouds. The school inspector was reporting her to the police and was about to get her banned from the school. The important thing is not to panic, said Carl as they sat in the head teacher's study, wondering what to do next. Yes, good, absolutely right, said Miss Wiz, panicking. If we can just get the two classes back by the end of the day, said Carl, we can pretend that the school inspector invented it all. Miss Wiz sat up straight in her chair and looked at him sternly. I cannot tell a lie, she said. Of course not, said Carl. Anyway, you're magic. I'm sure you can do it. Miss Wiz sighed. But I don't know the travelling spell, she said. Oh dear, said Carl gloomily. Of course, Miss Enchanter knows it, but she's too busy being a pigeon to be much use. Oh dear, said Carl even more gloomily. Miss Wiz stood up suddenly, picked up her chair and walked towards the door. We'll just have to go and get help, she said. Bring your chair to the playground, will you, Carl? My chair? Bewildered, Carl followed her out of the room, carrying his chair. Moments later, amid a loud humming noise, Carl and Miss Wiz were hovering a few feet above the playground. "Flying chairs?" Carl gasped. "Don't we need seat belts?" "Of course not," smiled Miss Wiz. "This is magic." The chairs rose high above the school, turned slowly towards the east and rose into the clouds. "Where are we going?" Carl shouted above the sound of the wind whistling past his ears. "Headquarters," said Miss Wiz. Headquarters? Carl remembered Lizzie saying that she had seen Miss Wiz's home, an old car, when she had helped rescue Lizzie's cat from burglars, but no one had ever mentioned headquarters. "Is it far?" he asked. "Beyond Ongar," said Miss Wiz. Beyond Ongar. Carl had never heard of Ongar, let alone a place beyond it. Soon the chairs were descending rapidly through the clouds, coming to rest in a quiet back street in front of a tall office block with dark windows. By the entrance there was a sign which read, P.O. Headquarters. "Here we are," said Miss Wiz, jumping off her chair. "The headquarters of the paranormal operatives." "I always thought P.O. stood for post office," said Carl. "So do a lot of people," said Miss Wiz with a smile. "They keep sending their parcels here." "That explains why the post is always late," Carl muttered as he followed Miss Wiz through some glass doors and into the building. At first he thought that the office reception area was like any other. Then he noticed that all the people working there had black nail varnish, and that there was a sign on the wall which said, "Remember, we are not witches, we are paranormal operatives," and that a secretary nearby was reading a book called Notions for Potions, Some Paranormal Recipes, while the keyboard beside her worked itself. Miss Wiz walked up to the reception desk. "I have urgent business with the travel department," she told the receptionist. "Would that be time travel, space travel, intercontinental travel, intergalactic travel, underwater travel, mind travel, or holiday bookings?" the woman asked, filing one of her black fingernails. "I need to get some children back from the other side of the world," said Miss Wiz. "That'll be intercontinental travel," said the receptionist sleepily. "Mr. Broom, our intercontinental travel executive, has gone for lunch in the Seychelles." "Then get him back," said Miss Wiz sharply. "I don't have the spell, do I?" said the woman. "Who has got it?" asked Carl, thinking that at this rate they would never get Class 3 back by the end of the day. The woman looked at him coldly. "Mr. Broom," she said, "and he's gone for—" "Enough!" Miss Wiz slammed the desk. "If you don't want to spend the rest of the day as a toad, you'll get him right now." The woman shrugged. "Room 305 on the 3rd floor," she said. "I'll see what I can do." When Miss Wiz and Carl reached room 305, they found a young man wearing a bathing suit and dark glasses sitting behind the desk. "This had better be important," he said moodily. "I was just going for a swim in the sea when I was called back." "It is," said Miss Wiz. "It's a case of missing children." Mr. Broom frowned as Miss Wiz explained the situation. Then he turned to a computer beside his desk and tapped some keys on the keyboard. Within seconds, a tropical scene appeared on the screen. "There appears to be some sort of beach party going on," said Mr. Broom. "Can you see any of your friends, young man?" Carl moved nearer to the screen. "There's Podge at the barbecue," he said suddenly. "And Katrina's dancing by the radio. Mr. Warlock seems to be asleep under a tree." "Are you sure you want to get them back?" asked Mr. Broom. "They seem to be having a very good time." "Absolutely," said Miss Wiz. "All good things come to an end." "Well, first of all, you have to get the magic darts," said Mr. Broom. "But they're at St. Barnabas," said Miss Wiz, "and I'm not allowed back." Mr. Broom shrugged. "Then you'll just have to find someone to work the spell for you," he said. And suddenly, Miss Wiz was smiling at Carl. Chapter 5. Small is Beautiful. There were times when Carl wished that he wasn't late for everything, and that afternoon, as he walked through the gates of St. Barnabas carrying a pencil case, was one of them. If it hadn't been for the cat following him this morning, he would be with Class 3 now, enjoying the sun and sand of Sombrero. Instead, he was the only person in the world who could bring them back and save Miss Wiz from getting into more trouble. He was going to cast a spell like a real paranormal operative. It was a bit dangerous, Miss Wiz had said, but she trusted him. As far as Carl could remember, this was the first time that anyone had ever trusted him with anything. The school inspector was pacing up and down inside the school gates like a watchdog. "What are you doing, young man?" he asked suspiciously. Carl held up the pencil case that Mr. Broom at P.O. headquarters had given him. "I forgot my pencil case," he said. "I went home to fetch it." The school inspector did not look entirely convinced. "You haven't seen that Miss Wiz woman, have you?" he asked. "She seems to have vanished into thin air." "That's because you banned her," said Carl. Said the school inspector. "Just as long as she's not lurking about somewhere." Inside the pencil case, Miss Wiz clung on to a fountain pen for dear life. She had agreed to help Carl with the travelling spell by making herself small enough to be smuggled into the school. From inside the case, she heard Carl telling the school inspector that he had to fetch his books from Class 3's room so that he could work in the library. The pencil case shook as he ran across the playground. Once again, Miss Wiz gripped the fountain pen. "The things I do for magic," she sighed. As soon as they were in the classroom, Carl opened the case and carefully lifted Miss Wiz onto the desk. "There's no time to lose," she said. "Grab the darts and I'll tell you the spell you've got to say." "I've got to say?" "I thought you wanted to see Sombrero," said Miss Wiz. "I do, but—" "Fine," smiled Miss Wiz. "You've got half an hour to travel across the world and bring your friends back. It's a piece of cake." "What will you do while I'm away?" Carl asked. "I suppose I'll have to hide in this case," said Miss Wiz. "The school inspector seems to be looking out for me." "I won't be long," said Carl, holding the darts tightly in his hand. Repeating the words after Miss Wiz, he muttered the spell. Suddenly, there was a humming noise, and, for a few seconds, Carl felt like an arrow flying through the air, buffeted by the wind. He squeezed his eyes shut until the shaking stopped. Then he heard voices. "Hey, it's Carl! What's he doing here? Late as usual. Wake up, Carl! You're just in time for the limbo competition." Slowly Carl opened his eyes. It was warm. The sunlight was dazzling. He could hear the distant sound of waves, and all around him were the children of Class 3. "Phew, huh," said Carl, dusting himself down. "I made it." "Come and do the limbo," said Katrina. "You have to lean back and dance under this low pole. It's great." Carl looked doubtful. "We haven't got much time before we have to get back," he said. "Carl worrying about the time," Jack laughed. "I've heard everything now." "All right," said Carl. "Someone go and wake up Mr. Warlock. I'll have a quick limbo, then we'll be on our way." Back at St. Barnabas, Miss Wiz sat in the darkness of Mr. Broom's pencil case and thought about the past. She remembered her adventures with the children of Class 3, the prize-giving when Mr. Gilbert was turned into a sheep, the time when a local hospital was invaded by white mice, the hunt for Liz's stolen cat, the day when Jack let loose ghosts and demons in a library, her adventures in a television set with Caroline and little Musher. "I've certainly been there, whenever magic was needed," she said to herself. "But maybe it's time to move to another school, or even to another country." She paced up and down in the darkness. Carl had been gone almost 10 minutes now. What if the spell had sent him to the wrong place, or he couldn't remember how to get back, or he had lost the magic darts? If something happened to her friends, she would never forgive herself. But then Miss Wiz smiled. Outside the pencil case, she heard a distant hum, which grew louder and louder. Suddenly the classroom was alive with the sound of children's voices. "Wow," Podge was saying. "I've just had the weirdest dream. I thought I was on a tropical island." "That was no dream," Carl said. Miss Wiz felt the pencil case being lifted. Its top opened slowly. She looked up and saw familiar faces looking down at her. "That was wizardry," Carl smiled. Miss Wiz climbed out of the pencil case and stood on the desk. It was difficult behaving like a serious head teacher when you're only 3 inches tall, but she had to give it a try. "Now, where's Mr. Warlock?" she asked. "He wanted to go straight home," said Carl, "so I gave him the spell and the second dart." "I think he was embarrassed at being unable to get us back," said Lizzie. "Quite right, too," said Miss Wiz. "Now, since I've been banned from the school, Carl is going to have to smuggle me out." "What happens if the school inspector asks where we've been?" asked Jack. Miss Wiz straightened her back and looked at him sternly. "You should say, 'I cannot tell a—'" "I think we should lie," said Carl firmly, "just this once." "All right," said Miss Wiz. "Say you went to a museum." At that moment there was a loud thudding noise on the roof of the classroom. "That will be Class 4, smiled Miss Wiz. "Miss Enchanter's very punctual. Can they get down all right?" "There's a ladder leading down from the roof," said Katrina. "Good," said Miss Wiz, as a pigeon appeared at the window, hovered for a moment and then flew off. "Miss Chanter's off home." She glanced at a clock on the wall. "It's time for you all to go too. Your parents will be waiting for you." "When will we see you again?" asked Podge. "Well, right now I'm going to take a holiday," said Miss Wiz, reaching inside the pencil case and pulling out some bright yellow trousers. "I've even brought my holiday clothes." "But you'll be back, won't you?" asked Caroline, "whenever magic's needed." Miss Wiz paused as she climbed back into the case. "I hope so," she said, with a smile, before closing the lid over her head. Carl walked home slowly. Just once he looked inside the case. There in the corner was the tiny black dress of a head teacher. Carefully putting it into his jacket pocket, Carl went over the strange magical events of the day, wondering whether he would ever see his paranormal friend again. He smiled at the thought of her. "Bye, Miss Wiz," he said quietly. Power-crazy Miss Wiz. Chapter 1. A lean, mean Peter Harris. It was the first day of the holidays. The fair was in town, and the sun shone high in the sky. But for Peter Harris, better known as Podge, it felt like the worst day of his life. He wandered through the fairground, thinking of the bad news he had received that morning. The Big Dipper loomed up in front of him, but he walked on. He heard the screams and laughter of children on the waltzer. He hardly looked at them. Even the candy floss store, which was normally Podge's first stop at the fair, didn't interest him today. Deep in thought, he found himself standing in front of a small circular stall, decked out with plastic toys and goldfish in transparent plastic bags. There was a table in the middle with some wooden cubes on it. A sign on the stall read, "Get the hoop over the cube, take a goldfish home." "Want to go, son?" The stallholder, a red-faced man whose large stomach stretched his dirty white shirt, held out a hoop. Podge shook his head. He never won anything. Anyway, he wasn't in the mood. He was just about to move away when he noticed one of the fishes seemed to be looking at him with that wide-eyed help-me expression that Podge's friend Henry Wilson put on when there was a maths test at school. Podge frowned. He didn't want to think of school right now. "Yes, we'll have a go, please." Podge turned to see, standing beside him, a girl in torn jeans and a baseball cap. The stallholder gave her a hoop, which she passed to Podge. "No thanks," said Podge quietly. "I'm useless at throwing things." "Not today you aren't," said the girl. Sighing, Podge held the hoop before him and took aim. As he drew his hand back, he was aware of a humming sound all around him. Now where had he heard that before? Concentrating as hard as he could, he let the hoop go. It moved through the air slowly, like a tiny spacecraft, and hovered over the block before settling neatly around it. "Eh?" The stallholder looked at the hoop suspiciously. "Brilliant throw," said the girl. "We'll have this goldfish, please." She pointed to the fish which Podge had been looking at. Podge looked at her more closely. She was a bit older than he had thought at first, and there was something familiar about her flashing green eyes. "Haven't we met somewhere?" Podge asked. Without a word, she held up her hand. On her nails was black nail varnish. "Miss Wiz!" Podge smiled for the first time that day. "What are you doing here?" "You know how it is," said Miss Wiz quietly. "I go wherever magic is needed." Grumpily, the stallholder handed her the goldfish. "Magic," he muttered. "Looked like a good old-fashioned cheating to me." Miss Wiz put her arm around Podge's shoulders. "So," she said, "tell me your problem." "I thought you knew everything," said Podge, turning away from the stall. Miss Wiz followed, holding the goldfish in front of her. "Not everything," she said. "The message I received this morning was, 'Magic alert, Podge Harris, parent problem.'" "Major parent problem," said Podge gloomily. "I'm not sure I really want to talk about it." Miss Wiz walked into a video arcade and stood in front of a computer game. "When did the problem take place?" she asked. "This morning at breakfast." "And your address is?" 15 Rylot Road. Miss Wiz pressed a few buttons on the machine. Briefly, the screen went fuzzy and made a quiet humming sound. Then it cleared to show a modern kitchen. In the centre of the room was a table, on either side of which sat a man and a woman, looking very serious. Between them was a child eating. "Hey, that's me!" Podge gasped. That's my kitchen, and there's Mum and Dad. It's a magical reconstruction of your kitchen at breakfast this morning. It's going to show me what happened. Oh no, Podge winced. This is going to be really embarrassing. On the screen, the figures started talking. Now, Peter, we need to have a serious discussion, Podge's father, Mr. Harris, was saying. What about? Said Podge. Don't talk with your mouth full, Mr. Harris snapped. Podge swallowed. Sorry, he said. Today's the start of your holidays, Peter, his father continued, and from now on there are going to be some changes around here. Changes? Number 1, you're going to spend less time with your nose in a book, reading stories, and more time learning for exams. But number 2, you're going on a diet. You look like a football on legs, so it's no more chocolate biscuits. This time next month I want to see a lean, mean Peter Harris. Lean? Mean? Number 3, Mr. Harris paused, I'm taking you away from that school of yours. Podge gasped. So Barnabas, Mr. Harris spat the words out in disgust, all you get there is larking about. What about my friends? Podge protested. There'll be time enough for friends when you've passed a few exams, said Mr. Harris, getting to his feet. My decision's final, and I won't budge. Will I, Mother? No, Mrs. Harris had sighed wearily. You won't budge. I see the problem now, said Miss Wiz, as the images faded from the screen. Somehow, we've got to make your father change his mind. Some hope, Podge muttered. You'd have to be Prime Minister to make my dad change his mind. Hey, great vid, said a voice behind them. Miss Wiz and Podge turned to see Jack Beddoes, Podge's best friend. What did you have to do to win? Said Jack, looking at the screen. Get the big boy through the kitchen door? Great joke, said Podge. I saw you with Miss Wiz, said Jack. I thought you were playing a game. That was no game, said Miss Wiz. It was real. Podge is being taken away from St. Barnabas. It's time for action. She walked out of the video arcade in the direction of the Dodgem cars. I don't believe it, Jack said to Podge. And I'm being put on a diet, said Podge. My dad says I look like a football on legs. It's not true, is it? Well... Fortunately for Jack, they were interrupted by Ms. Wiz waving to them from a purple Dodgem car. Come on, she shouted. We've got no time to lose. Typical Ms. Wiz, said Podge. It's the most serious day of my life and she wants to ride a bumper car. Both of them squeezed into the Dodgem with Podge in the driving seat. I say, a man eating some candy floss nearby pointed to the Dodgem car. You're only allowed 2 people per car, you know. I think one of you really ought to get out. Do you? Said Miss Wiz innocently. As the man walked towards a fairground assistant, the candy floss he was holding seemed to be growing larger and larger, until seconds later it covered the whole of his head and the top of his body. Help! He shouted in a muffled voice. Where am I? Everything's gone pink! Let's go, said Miss Wiz. She reached under her seat and took out a white umbrella which she fixed to the front of the Dodgem. It began to turn faster and faster, like the propeller of a helicopter. No, Miss Wiz, said Podge nervously, as the Dodgem floated upwards. I don't think this is one of your better ideas. But the Dodgem seemed to have a life of its own. It climbed higher and higher over the fairground. Brilliant ride, said Jack, and we didn't even pay. I hate heights. Podge was clinging onto the steering wheel. I get travel sick. This is meant to be a bumper car, not a bumper plane. As the Dodgem picked up speed, Miss Wiz took off her baseball cap and let the wind blow through her long dark hair. London, here we come. Why are we going to London? Jack asked. Didn't I tell you? Miss Wiz raised her voice above the whistling of the wind. We're off to see the Prime Minister. It was Podge's idea. What? Said Podge. I never... Well done, Podge, shouted Jack. Chapter 2. Mad Goldfish Disease. A purple Dodgem car, suspended by a whirling white umbrella, flew high over the streets of London. As it skimmed a few feet above Buckingham Palace, it seemed to be slowing down. Now, here's what we're going to do, said Miss Wiz to Podge and Jack. In a few moments' time, we shall be meeting the Prime Minister. Yeah, muttered Jack, who didn't believe anything until he could see it. And I shall be asking him to pass a new law to prevent parents taking children away from schools against their wishes. Are you sure he can pass laws all by himself? Asked Podge. Of course he can, said Miss Wiz. "He's Prime Minister, isn't he?" "I think it may be a bit more complicated than that," said Jack. "Honestly, you two." Miss Wiz crossed her arms, almost crushing the goldfish she was carrying. "You're so negative. Just trust me." "We'll have to," said Jack, looking over the edge of the dodgem. "We're coming into land." "Now, it's very important that we act as a team," said Miss Wiz. "I'll be in charge, Podge will be my adviser, and Jack will look after Henry." "Henry?" "Named after Henry Wilson at school," said Podge. Miss Wiz passed Jack the bag containing the goldfish. "This is Henry," she smiled. "He's very important." "Typical," grumbled Jack. "Miss Wiz gets the power, Podge gets the fun, and I get the goldfish." The dodgem hovered a few feet above a wide pavement. As it landed, a small crowd of people gathered on the pavement, staring and pointing. A tall, bearded policeman pushed his way towards them. Taking one look at the dodgem, he reached into his top pocket for a notebook. "No number plates," he muttered to himself. "Parked in a bus lane. Driver under age." Miss Wiz stepped out of the dodgem, and Podge noticed that while they had been travelling, her clothes had changed from a torn T-shirt to a smart grey suit. "I'm sorry about our parking officer," she said. "We had to stop here because we're looking for an animal hospital." "Oh, yeah?" The policeman drew himself up to his full height. "I don't see no animals." Without a word, Miss Wiz took the bag containing Henry the goldfish from Jack. "Look at him, the poor little creature." She held the bag in front of the policeman's face. "He's suffering from mad goldfish disease, swimming round and round, going bonkers before your very eyes." "Don't be daft, lady," said the policeman, his eyes following Henry. "All goldfish do that." "But they don't do this," said Miss Wiz under her breath, as a distant humming noise could be heard. "You are now feeling very drowsy," she said. "You want to go to sleep." "I don't believe it," whispered Jack. "She's using Henry to hypnotize the policeman." Slowly Miss Wiz lowered the bag. The policeman continued to stare into space, his mouth hanging open. "You are now under my spell," said Miss Wiz quietly. "You will do everything you are told. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," said the policeman. "Please take me to the Prime Minister's house." "Yes, ma'am." "Then come back and make sure no one touches our dodgem." "No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." The policeman turned, and slowly, like a sleepwalker, made his way past the barrier and into a quiet side road. "It's Downing Street," whispered Podge, who had seen a street sign. "This is where the Prime Minister lives." The policeman reached number 10 Downing Street and knocked on the door. "Who shall I say is calling, ma'am?" he asked. "Miss Wisdom, Mr. Peter Harris and Mr. Jack Beddoes," said Miss Wiz. A young woman with neat blonde hair and a neat blue suit opened the door. "Miss Beddoes, Mr. Jack Peters and Mr. Wisdom Harris to see the Prime Minister," said the policeman in a distant voice. "Great memory," Jack muttered. "I'm afraid the Prime Minister is too busy to see anyone, but—" "Too busy?" Miss Wiz pushed forward. "This is important. What's he doing?" "He's just busy," said the woman, her smile becoming less friendly. "The country doesn't run itself, you know. Now, my name's Marjorie, and I'm from the Prime Minister's office. I'm sure I can help you." "I don't think so," said Miss Wiz. "This is a highly confidential matter." "Then, in that case, I suggest you write a letter and... As a faint hum could be heard, Marjorie stopped speaking and stood as motionlessly as if she had been frozen. "Sorry, Marge," said Miss Wiz, stepping past her into the house. "I'll just have to put a statue spell on you for the moment." Jack looked nervously at Podge. "I've never seen her this determined," he muttered, as they followed her into the house. "Now," said Miss Wiz, looking around the dark hall of number 10 Downing Street. "I wonder where the person in charge is." "Why, that must be me." A man in a dark suit stood at the foot of the stairs in front of them. "Would you mind telling me what you're doing in my house?" he said. Podge gulped. "It's the Prime—" "He looks smaller than he does on telly," said Jack. Miss Wiz smiled politely. "Marjorie told us you were too busy to see us." "She was right," said the Prime Minister. "And we have a problem," said Miss Wiz, extending her hand backwards towards Jack. "He's called Henry." "Henry?" "Yes. Miss Wiz held the plastic bag before the Prime Minister's eyes. "Just look at him." Henry swam round and round and round. "You want to go to sleep." "Why?" The Prime Minister swayed slightly as he spoke in a distant voice. "Why, it's a goldfish." "Prime Minister," said Miss Wiz, "you are now in my power." Chapter 3. Order, Order. At 15 Rylet Road, Podge's father, Cuthbert Harris, was crouched over a pile of wood with a screwdriver in his hand. "This new desk I've bought will be a surprise for the lad," he was saying to Mrs. Harris, who watched him as he tried to make sense of the instructions. "It shows that we're doing our bit. He works harder, loses his storybooks, goes on a diet, gives up chocolate biscuits, says goodbye to his friends and leaves his school. We buy him a desk. That's fair, isn't it?" He frowned. "Now, I wonder how this leg goes." Without a word, Mrs. Harris took the screwdriver from her husband and began to assemble the desk. "Action, that's the thing," said Mr. Harris, leaning against the wall. "In this life there are doers and watchers. I want our lad to do things, like his father." "Pass me that screw, will you, Cuthbert?" said Mrs. Harris, who was already on the second leg of the desk. "The lad's got to learn. It's dog eat dog out there." "Talking of learning," Mrs. Harris reached for the third leg, "why have you taken Peter's books from his shelves?" "I'm chucking them out," said Mr. Harris. "They're just stories. Those bookshelves will be needed for the exam guides I've bought." He reached inside a plastic bag beside him. "There's mathematics for exams, geography for exams, English for exams." He opened one of the books. Mrs. Harris picked up the fourth leg of the desk. "Listen to this, Mother." Mr. Harris stabbed a fat finger at the book in his hand. "It says here, 'Welcome to English for Exams. This little guide will help you pass your English tests. The most important thing to remember is that the more books you read, the better you will be at English.'" Mr. Harris frowned, then continued, "It doesn't matter what books you read, so long as you enjoy—" His voice trailed off. "Interesting." Mrs. Harris smiled to herself as she screwed in the desk's last leg. "Oh, all right," Podge's father shrugged impatiently. "I suppose Peter can keep his books if he likes." Mrs. Harris stood up and looked at her work with satisfaction. "I wonder where he's got to," she said. At that moment, Podge was sitting between Miss Wiz and Jack at a long, shiny table in the cabinet room at number 10 Downing Street. Facing them was the Prime Minister. "So that's our problem, Prime Minister," Miss Wiz was saying. "All we need you to do is pass a law that will prevent Mr. Harris taking Podge away from St. Barnabas." The Prime Minister smiled. "I'm glad you raised that point," he said. "But at the end of the day, we're not playing on a level playing field. Someone has moved the goalposts. We're in a whole different ball game." "I beg your pardon?" Miss Wiz looked confused. "Don't panic, Miss Wiz," said Jack quietly. "This is just the way politicians talk. You have to ask the question again." "Can you please help us, Prime Minister?" "That's a very good question," said the Prime Minister. "But as I've said on a number of occasions, there's a whole range of options and—" Miss Wiz banged the table. "Yes or no, PM?" No." "Why not?" Podge asked. "You're meant to be the person in charge." "Parliament," said the Prime Minister. "Laws have to go through Parliament." For a moment there was silence in the cabinet room. "That's it then," said Podge eventually. "Not even Miss Wiz could hypnotise the whole of Parliament." "Unless—" An odd smile had appeared on the Prime Minister's face. "Unless someone came with me to the Houses of Parliament this afternoon, someone who could make a speech—" "Miss Wiz," said Podge. "No," said Miss Wiz. "I couldn't possibly. I don't think magic and politics mix." "Come on," said Jack. "You've taught Class 3. It would be a piece of cake after that." "Do it for me," begged Podge. "I think you'd do it very well," said the Prime Minister. "I'll introduce you to the House of Commons and Marjorie can look after Podge and Jack, if you'll just let her move around again." Miss Wiz sighed. "Oh, all right," she said. "Just a little speech." "Yeah," said Jack. "Vote for Miss Wiz." "Order! Order!" 30 minutes later, Podge and Jack were looking down on the House of Commons from a high balcony where they had been taken by Marjorie. "The government MPs are on one side and the opposition MPs are on the other," Marjorie whispered. "The person in the wig who keeps saying order, order is called the Speaker. She's meant to keep everyone under control." "She's not doing much of a job," muttered Jack. "I've seen more order in the last Assembly of Term at St Barnabas." "But where's the Prime Minister? Where's Miss Wiz?" asked Podge. As he spoke, an odd growling sound came from the MPs below them. They seemed to be looking towards the door. "Here they come," said Marjorie. Slowly, the Prime Minister made his way between the rows of MPs. Pale but dignified, Miss Wiz followed him. As they took their seats on the front bench, the Speaker pointed towards them. "Pray silence for the Prime Minister," she said loudly. The Prime Minister stood up. Actually," he said, "I'm not going to make a speech this afternoon." "Good," shouted one of the MPs opposite. "Run out of words, have you?" laughed another. "How rude," said Podge. "I hope they're not this mean to Miss Wiz." "Instead, I've asked my good friend Miss Wiz to speak on my behalf." An astonished silence descended on the chamber. Miss Wiz rose to her feet. "Thanks, PM," she said. "Now, the reason why I've decided to talk to you this afternoon is that I want you to pass a law to help a boy called Peter Harris." "Order! Order!" the Speaker interrupted. "What on earth is going on here? You can't just wander in here and announce that you want to make a law." A faint humming sound filled the House of Commons. "Hoo, hoo, hoo!" The children stared at the Speaker in amazement. In her place there now sat a small grey monkey jumping up and down angrily. One of the MPs on the front bench facing Miss Wiz stood up. "I must object to a complete stranger coming into the House and somehow replacing Madam Speaker with a monkey. This is absolutely... Whoa!" In his place stood a gorilla, thumping his chest. "Uh-oh," said Jack. "Something tells me Miss Wiz is losing control of this situation. Now, Peter Harris likes his..." Miss Wiz raised her voice above the noise of interruptions. "He likes his food." Every MP who stood up to say something was turned into a different kind of monkey. Soon her words were being drowned by the noise of chattering, angry, scratching monkeys. Miss Wiz looked about her and frowned. "We shall return," she said, pulling the Prime Minister to his feet and backing towards the door. "We shall work on our speech at number 10 Downing Street." "I suppose that's it then," said Jack, getting to his feet. "We'd better go home." Podge followed gloomily. "Miss Wiz was right about one thing," he said. "Politics and magic don't mix." Chapter 4. A Message from the PM. The Prime Minister's car moved slowly through the crowds that had gathered outside the Houses of Parliament. On the back seat, Podge and Jack sat between the Prime Minister and Marjorie. Miss Wiz was in the front, waving to the crowd. "What's happened to Miss Wiz?" Jack whispered to Podge. "One speech to the House of Commons, and suddenly she's behaving like she's the Queen or something." "And it wasn't exactly the greatest speech ever made," grumbled Podge. "We'll never get my dad to change his mind now." "Cameras, television, that's what you want," said the Prime Minister in a strange, dreamlike voice. "Oh, Prime Minister," Miss Wiz smiled modestly. "All this fame, and so soon." "I meant for Podge," said the Prime Minister. "If we want his parents to change their mind, we'll need publicity, television." "That's it," Jack turned to Podge. "If you appeared on television, your dad would have to pay attention. You'd be the week's good cause. Podge-aid." "Marjorie, I want to speak to the nation with Miss Wiz," said the Prime Minister suddenly, "in half an hour's time." But, sir," Marjorie had turned pale, "we're only meant to do that when there's a national emergency." "This is an emergency. Podge is being forced to leave St Barnabas." "Anyway," said Marjorie, "it's a terrible time to appear on television. Everyone will be waiting to watch that daily soap opera, The Avenue." "Dad's favourite programme," said Podge. "Perfect," the Prime Minister smiled. "Get the cameras round as soon as we arrive." "My speech." In the front seat, Miss Wiz stopped waving for a moment. "I must work on my speech." "Crazy," sighed Jack. Mr. Harris was exhausted. He had helped Mrs. Harris while she was assembling the desk. He had watched while she tidied all the books in the bedroom. He had stood by, offering advice while Mrs. Harris worked out a diet that would help produce a lean, mean Peter Harris. "Phew," he said, flopping into an armchair in front of the television. "Any chance of a cup of tea, Mother?" No, Cuthbert. Mrs. Harris sat down beside him. I made the desk, you make the tea. There's just time before the avenue. Grumbling, Mr. Harris stood up. Work, 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 he muttered. I can't think where Peter's got to, said Mrs. Harris. He was meant to be back an hour ago. Having too much fun, probably, Mr. Harris called out from the kitchen. There'll be an end to that with the new school. Grumbling, he returned to the sitting room and switched on the television. There's now a change to the advertised programme, said the TV announcer. Instead of the Avenue, we'll be going over live in a few moments to number 10 Downing Street for a message from the Prime Minister. Oh, no, said Mr. Harris. The Prime Minister's office was lit up by television lights. A rather large television producer called Miss Barkworth was fussing around with the papers on the Prime Minister's desk. This is all most irregular, sir, she said. We haven't even been given a script for you to read from the autocue. What's an autocue? Jack asked Podge as they watched the preparations. It's the little screen they read from when they're making a speech on telly, Podge whispered. I don't need a script, the Prime Minister was telling the producer. My colleague, Ms. Wiz, will be doing most of the talking. But who is this Wiz person? The producer lowered her voice as she saw Ms. Wiz pacing nervously backwards and forwards in the office. Has she ever done any public speaking? She spoke to the House of Commons this afternoon, said the Prime Minister. An excellent speech it was. Yeah, muttered Jack. She made monkeys of them. Miss Wiz stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing her lines. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, then frowned. No, too serious. Hello, everybody. No, that's wrong. Hi, my name's Miss Wiz. Just be yourself, smiled Podge. You'll be fine. 30 seconds before we're on air, shouted Miss Barkworth, scurrying behind the camera. I want the PM at his desk, Miss Wiz standing beside him and the fat boy a bit to the left. She's not exactly Miss Skinny herself, murmured Jack as he moved out of camera range. Shh! The producer held up 5 fingers, then 4, 3, 2, 1. The Prime Minister switched on his most sincere smile as a red light appeared above the camera. Hello, he said. I expect you're all wondering why I decided to speak to the nation this afternoon. Chapter 5. A Lady Not for Turning. Mr. Harris sat grumpily in front of the television set, a mug of tea in his hand. Politicians, he said to Mrs. Harris. You work hard, you do your best for your lad. All you ask in return is a chance to relax in front of the Avenue. But no. It must be something really important, said Mrs. Harris. People don't interrupt the Avenue for nothing. Publicity, mother, Mr. Harris slurped his tea. Your average politician would do anything for publicity. And so, the Prime Minister was saying on television, I would now like to hand you over to my friend and colleague, Ms. Wiz. Ms. Wiz? Mr. Harris sat forward in his chair. Isn't that the woman who turned up at St. Barnabas and sent a rat up the school inspector's trousers? What on earth is she doing there? Asked Mrs. Harris. I always knew that woman spelt trouble. Shh, Cuthbert, said Mrs. Harris. Let's hear what she has to say. Ms. Wiz sat easily on the edge of the Prime Minister's desk. This afternoon I want to tell you the story of a little boy, she said. Just an ordinary lad. He likes his books, he likes his friends, he likes his chocolate biscuits. As she smiled, the camera moved closer to her face. Yet this little boy's father has decided to drag him away from his school, his lovely childhood friends. Poor little mite, said Mr. Harris. His nice stories. What a shame, said Mr. Harris. Even his chocolate biscuits. Mr. Harris shook his head. Some parents don't deserve to have children, he said. Is this fair? The woman on the television glanced to her right. Look at this boy. Is he really so fat? She paused as the camera turned to show a child in the shadows of the office. Yes, all right. Perhaps he is a bit plump, Ms. Wiz smiled. But maybe he eats food as a way of expressing himself, as a way of asking for love from his mum and dad. Maybe every chocolate biscuit that he eats is not so much a chocolate biscuit as a cry for help. And the little thing looks just like our Peter, sobbed Mrs. Harris. I don't care who he is. Mr. Harris blew his nose on a big red handkerchief. That boy's parents should be more understanding. So I ask you all today, the woman continued, listen to your children. They have the right to have friends, books, even chocolate biscuits now and then. Let the example of Podge Harris be an example to us all." Mr. and Mrs. Harris stopped crying and stared at one another in amazement. "Podge Harris," they said. The cameras had left number 10 Downing Street, but Miss Wiz was behaving more and more strangely. "Where are my ministers?" she asked, looking about her as she sat at the Prime Minister's desk. "I want to go to Parliament and make some laws." "You did brilliantly, Miss Wiz," said Podge, "but I think we ought to be on our way home. Our parents will be getting worried." "Home?" Miss Wiz looked shocked. "But my work here has just begun. This lady is not for turning." "I'm starving," muttered Podge. "Now, PM," Miss Wiz beckoned to the back of the room where the Prime Minister stood with Marjorie and Miss Barkworth. "I'd like to discuss some new laws that we'll be making." "But, Miss Wiz," the Prime Minister smiled politely, "you've turned most of Parliament into monkeys." "The spell will have worn off by now," said Miss Wiz, "but I could do it again if you like." "Yes, that's a good idea. If people disagree with us, I'll just change them into monkeys." "What are we going to do with her?" Podge whispered to Jack. "She's gone power crazy." Jack was staring at Henry the goldfish, whose plastic bag he had put on a bookshelf nearby. "What we need is a bit of magic to help us. A bit of Henry magic." He picked up the bag. "Oh no, Miss Wiz," he said loudly. "Look what's happened." Frowning, Miss Wiz turned. "What's the problem, Jack?" she asked. "It's Henry. He's been dazzled by the television lights." He held the fish up in front of Miss Wiz's eyes. "Miss Wiz," he said, "you want to go to sleep." Miss Wiz stared straight ahead of her. Podge gulped. "I don't believe it," he gasped. "You've hypnotised Miss Wiz." "She said Henry had his own magic. I thought it might work on her, and it did," Jack smiled. "Miss Wiz, you are now going to say goodbye to the Prime Minister," he said. "Goodbye, Prime Minister," said Miss Wiz in a sleepy voice. "Goodbye, Miss Wiz," said the Prime Minister. "You will ask him to pass a law banning all schools." "Jack!" Podge grabbed his arm. "Don't mess about. Let's go home." "That was a joke, Miss Wiz," said Jack quickly. "Please take us back to the Purple Dodgem and then fly us home." "Anything you say, Jack," said Miss Wiz. They walked slowly towards the front door. "Shouldn't you take the spell off the Prime Minister?" Marjorie asked. "Otherwise he'll be staring into space and talking like a computer forever." Jack looked at the Prime Minister for a moment. "I don't think anyone will notice the difference," he said. "Thanks, PM," Podge shouted back. "Good luck, Podge," said the Prime Minister, closing the door of number 10 Downing Street behind them. The Purple Dodgem hovered just above 15 Rylett Road before landing gently on the Harrises' carefully tended lawn. "Peter!" Mrs. Harris opened the front door. "We were so worried about you." Mr. Harris appeared behind his wife. "We saw you on telly, son. You look great." "Dad's been thinking," said Mrs. Harris, nudging her husband. "Have I?" Mr. Harris frowned. "Oh, yes." He placed his arm around Podge's shoulder. "Son," he said, "maybe I was a bit hasty this morning." "You mean about the books and the biscuits and St. Barnabas?" asked Podge. "That's right." Mr. Harris managed to smile. "Yeah," said Jack. "Good old Mr. Harris, and it's all thanks to Miss Wiz." They turned to the Purple Dodgem where Miss Wiz was sitting motionlessly. "What's the matter with her, Jack?" asked Mrs. Harris. "I think she's just feeling a bit tired," said Jack, walking over to the Dodgem. He clicked his fingers in front of Miss Wiz's eyes. "Well, what?" Miss Wiz shook her head and rubbed her eyes as if she were just waking up. "I had this weird dream that I went crazy for power." "Unbelievable," said Jack. "And," Miss Wiz started laughing, "I even thought Podge was being taken away from St. Barnabas and put on a diet." "Ridiculous," said Mr. Harris. "Oh, well, so long as it was just a dream," said Miss Wiz. "I'd better get this back to the fair." There was a faint humming noise as she drove the Purple Dodgem back to the road. "I think I'll go by road to the fairground," she said. "The traffic isn't too bad." "Drive carefully, Miss Wiz," said Podge. "And thank you." "Bye, Podge. Bye, Jack," she called out. "Bye, Mr. and Mrs. Harris." With a roar of the engine, she accelerated away and within seconds had turned the corner of the street and disappeared. For a moment, Mr. and Mrs. Harris and the children listened as the scream of tyres faded in the distance. "She may be magic, but she's no driver," muttered Mr. Harris. Podge turned into the house. "I'm starving," he said. "Oh, Peter," said Mrs. Harris. "What about that diet then, son?" Mr. Harris asked. "Podge," Jack stepped forward, holding Henry the goldfish in front of him. "Watch the fishy, please." Podge hesitated, then followed Henry with his eyes as he swam round and round. "Can you hear me?" said Jack. "Yes." Podge's voice was strange and lifeless. "I can hear you, O master." "Say after me, I want to go to sleep. I want a chocolate biscuit." Jack shrugged at Mr. and Mrs. Harris as Podge made for the kitchen. "Sometimes the magic takes a little time to work," he said. Ms. Wiz Loves Dracula. Chapter 1. A Load of Parents Getting Drunk. It was the end of the last day of autumn term at St. Barnabas School. Children were running across the playground to be met by their parents at the school gate. From the gym nearby could be heard the sound of a radio playing. Tonight was the night of the Christmas fancy dress dance held by the PTA, and some of the teachers were putting up the decorations. With their satchels slung over their shoulders, Jack Beddoes and Lizzie Thompson stood at the doorway of the gym and watched as Class 3's teacher, Mr. Bailey, climbed a stepladder to attach balloons to the wall bars. "Call themselves the Parent-Teacher Association," said Jack. "All they want to do is prance about in fancy dress." Lizzie smiled. "Miss Gomez told Class 4 that she was going as Teddy Edward. There's a rumour that Mr. Gilbert's hired a Superman costume." "Is it a bird? Is it a plane?" said Jack in his favourite American accent. "No, it's the head teacher of St. Barnabas School in a silly suit." "I wonder what Mr. Bailey's going as," whispered Lizzie. "A ghost, probably," said Jack. "He'd look all right with a sheet over his head." As if he had heard their conversation, Mr. Bailey glanced over and saw the two children standing in the doorway. "Off you go, you two," he called out. "It's the grown-ups' time now." "Bye, sir," Jack called out. "Don't forget to dance with Teddy Edward." It was getting dark as Jack and Lizzie made their way across the school playground and out of the gate towards Lizzie's house, where Jack was staying that night. "I know it's only a stupid fancy dress dance, but I really wish we were going," Jack said. "I'd give anything to see Mr. Gilbert as the Man of Steel." "And we've got Helen from next door babysitting," said Lizzie gloomily. "She's really strict about when we go to bed." "If only we had—" Jack had just been about to say, "If only we had Miss Wiz as a babysitter," when he saw a familiar figure sitting on a wall across the road from the school. She was wearing a long overcoat and a woolly hat, but that dark hair was unmistakable. "Look who it is," he said. "I don't believe it," said Lizzie. "She hasn't visited us for ages." "Miss Wiz!" Jack shouted as they ran towards a zebra crossing nearby, but the figure continued to look down at the pavement, deep in thought. "She doesn't look very happy," murmured Lizzie as they approached. "Perhaps she's lost her magic." "Yo, Miss Wiz!" Jack called out. Miss Wiz looked up, as if awakening from a daydream. "Hi, Jack," she smiled. "Hi, Lizzie." "We were just talking about you," said Jack. "I'm staying with Lizzie tonight and we need a babysitter." "Yeah, it's unfair," said Lizzie. "My mum and Jack's parents are going to the PTA fancy dress dance, and we have to stay at home with the world's strictest babysitter." "Fancy dress?" Suddenly Miss Wiz looked interested. "That sounds fun." "Nah, you'd hate it," said Jack. "It's just a load of parents getting drunk and dancing with teachers to really old 60s songs." "Great!" Miss Wiz jumped down off the wall. "Where can I get a ticket?" Mrs. Thompson was in a bad mood. Lizzie and Jack had promised not to be late back from school, and they were. The shop where she had hired a nurse's uniform for tonight's dance had promised it would fit her, and it didn't. She was looking at herself in the hall mirror when the bell rang. "Glad you could make it," she said, opening the door to Lizzie and Jack. Lizzie looked at her mother in the nurse's uniform. You look great, Mum," she said eventually. "Yeah, dig Florence Nightingale," said Jack in a serious attempt at politeness. "I look ridiculous," moaned Mrs. Thompson. "I'm all bulgy." From the darkness behind Jack and Lizzie could be heard a faint humming sound. "What's happening?" Mrs. Thompson looked down at her uniform, which seemed to be slowly expanding. After a few seconds, the material stopped moving. It was now a perfect fit. "Is that any better?" asked Miss Wiz, stepping out of the shadows. "This is Miss Wiz," said Lizzie. "You remember, the paranormal operative who used to visit Class 3. Well, she's back, and as you can see, her magic's still working. Paranormal operative? Magic? Mrs. Thompson looked from the nurse's uniform to Miss Wiz. The costume won't shrink back at the wrong moment, will it? She asked nervously. I don't want to go all bulgy again, just when I'm dancing with Mr. Gilbert. Miss Wiz laughed. No, she said. Anyway, I'll be there to make sure the spell keeps working. Will you? Mrs. Thompson looked surprised. Miss Wiz wants to go to the dance, Lizzie explained. Weren't you banned once from St. Barnabas? Asked Mrs. Thompson. Something about sending a class on a field trip to the other side of the world? Miss Wiz shrugged. It was a long time ago. Anyway, no one will recognise me in fancy dress. I'm not sure. Mrs. Thompson frowned as she turned towards the kitchen. Will you promise not to do any of your spells? She asked. Trust me, said Miss Wiz. Oh, all right, said Mrs. Thompson. You can change in my room upstairs. But what will you change into? Lizzie asked. Miss Wiz smiled. I'll think of something, she said. There's one thing I don't understand, said Jack, after Miss Wiz had gone to change. Whenever Miss Wiz comes to see us, she tells us that she goes where magic is needed. That's true, said Lizzie. There's always a problem that needs solving when she turns up. So who is it who needs the magic now? Asked Jack. There was silence in the kitchen as the three of them thought about this. Perhaps it's Miss Wiz herself who needs the magic, said Mrs. Thompson eventually. Miss Wiz need magic? Jack laughed. Never. She might be lonely, said Mrs. Thompson. That would explain why she's so keen on going to the dance. Maybe she's looking for a boyfriend, said Lizzie. Jack laughed. Don't be ridiculous, he said. Miss Wiz isn't like that. Anyway, she's got Herbert the rat for company. A rat's not quite the same as a boyfriend, said Lizzie. Said Mrs. Thompson. No comment. There was a rustling sound from the stairs. A dark, wild-haired witch dressed in stylish black off-the-shoulder rags, her green eyes sparkling, made her way slowly down the stairs. How do I look? Asked Miss Wiz. Chapter 2. Strangers in the Night. Before Dracula arrived, it had been a PTA dance like any other PTA dance. There was soggy quiche, there was wine which even Mrs. Hicks, who could drink almost anything, had difficulty in swallowing. One of the dads had already hurt his back doing the twist. In spite of all Mr. Bailey's efforts, the gym didn't really look like a disco. It looked like a gym with a few balloons hanging from the walls. Miss Wiz stood with Liz's mother near the Christmas tree. She wanted to dance, but the fathers seemed to be too nervous to speak to her. I think they recognise me, she whispered to Mrs. Thompson. They're worried I'll bewitch them or something. Mrs. Thompson glanced at Miss Wiz. The trouble is we're not used to such glamorous witches at St. Barnabas, she said. We have this idea that a witch should be an old girl with a hunchback, long dirty fingernails, and a drip on the end of her crooked nose. How very old-fashioned, sighed Miss Wiz, smiling at a small figure in a strange costume who was now approaching them. Hello, I'm the head teacher, said Mr. Gilbert, shaking Miss Wiz's hand. He gave a nervous little laugh. Except tonight I'm Superman. Oh, yes, said Miss Wiz, who had been wondering why he was wearing blue pyjamas and a little red cape. Pleased to meet you, Superman. Now, I can't help feeling we've met somewhere before, said Mr. Gilbert. I don't think so, said Miss Wiz quickly. My name's... It was at that precise moment that the music stopped and the lights went out. There were groans from around the gym. Not another power cut, said a voice in the darkness. That's the third time the electricity's gone off this week. Someone standing by the doorway lit a match. The door behind him opened to reveal a tall, dark figure with glittering eyes. Two long incisor teeth protruded slightly over his lower lip. Got a torch, Count Dracula, laughed one of the parents. The figure in black said nothing. Typical, laughed Liz's mother, as Mr. Gilbert hurried away to find some candles. Something like this always happens at the PTA dance, but at least it saved you from having to dance with Superman. Miss Wiz was staring across the room. That man's got the heaviest feet. Mrs. Thompson realised that Miss Wiz was no longer listening to her. Have you seen someone you know? A hint of colour had come to Miss Wiz's cheeks. I think I've just seen the vampire of my dreams, she said. Lizzie wasn't tired, nor was Jack. They sat in Liz's room listening to the television downstairs and wondering what was happening at the PTA dance. My mum says that when you can't sleep, you should get up and walk around a bit, said Lizzie. Jack thought about this for a moment. Perhaps we could walk down the road to St. Barnabas. The fresh air would do us good. We could take a look at the dance through the window of the gym." "What about Helen downstairs?" Lizzie whispered. "We'll only be gone a few minutes. She's probably asleep in front of the telly." Without another word, the two children dressed. "This is bad," muttered Lizzie as, a few minutes later, they stood at the top of the stairs. "My mum'll kill me if she sees us." They crept downstairs, silently lifted the spare front door key off a hook in the hall, and let themselves out of the house into the dark night. It had been one of the strangest dances she had ever been to, Liz's mother thought as she danced with Mr. Harris. First of all, when the electricity had come back on, there had been an odd humming noise from the direction of Miss Wiz. Suddenly the lights in the gym had dimmed, giving it a soft, romantic glow. "That's better," Miss Wiz had said. Without another word, she had walked across the room and had introduced herself to Dracula. Then there was the music. Normally it was loud and fast at the PTA dance, but when Miss Wiz had first walked onto the dance floor with Dracula, she had glanced at the cassette player, there had been another humming noise, and from then on, the only music the machine would play was slow, smoochy Frank Sinatra songs, to which Miss Wiz and Dracula danced all evening. Not that the music made any difference to Mr. Harris, Mrs. Thompson sighed herself. As usual, he was pushing her around the dance floor like a removal man delivering a cupboard on his last shift. Over his shoulder, Mrs. Thompson smiled as she saw Dracula and Miss Wiz dancing slowly in one of the darker corners. "It's all very strange indeed," she murmured. "What's that, love?" Mr. Harris barked in her ear. It's strange how well you dance," said Mrs. Thompson quickly. "Oh, yes, I like a good old stomp," said Mr. Harris, treading hard on her right toe. As the song ended, Miss Wiz and Dracula slipped out of the gym and into the playground. "I'd better be going home now," said Dracula in a deep, silky voice. "Of course," Miss Wiz smiled cheerfully. "The last train for Transylvania must be leaving soon. Perhaps we could, you know." Dracula seemed to be lost for words. "Do you fancy going to the cinema sometime?" Miss Wiz laughed. "Afternoon show, I suppose. You must be busy at night." "Busy? Night shift. All that flying about with the other vampires." "Yes, of course," Dracula sighed. "It does keep me busy." For a moment there was an awkward silence in the playground, except for the sound of strangers in the night drifting across from the gym. "Well," said Miss Wiz softly, "it's been a great pleasure." She shook Dracula's hand and turned away. "What did you say your name was?" Dracula called out. "Miss Wiz, but you can call me Dolores. Can I telephone you?" Miss Wiz hesitated. "I'm not on the telephone, I'm afraid," she said. "But I suppose you could leave a message for me with Liz's mother, Mrs. Thompson." She waved and walked into the gym. "Who's Lizzie? Who's Mrs. Thompson?" murmured Dracula to himself. "Oh, I'll never see that beautiful witch again." He took a handkerchief out of his top pocket and blew his nose. Then slowly and sadly he walked out of the school gates and down the road. "Talk about embarrassing," said Jack, emerging from the shadows nearby. "For one moment I thought they were going to kiss or something gross like that." "They couldn't," said Lizzie. "His teeth would get in the way, wouldn't they?" Glancing down, she noticed a small white card on the ground. "He dropped something," she said, picking it up. "It says College of National Assessment. Then there's an address. Maybe he wasn't Dracula after all." "Of course he was," said Jack. "I mean, he wouldn't go around with cards saying, 'Dracula, for all your vampire and blood-sucking needs, estimates free,' would he? That card's just to throw people off his track." Lizzie was walking towards the school gate. "He seemed a bit shy for a vampire," she said. "That was a vampire, all right," said Jack. "Can you imagine Miss Wiz dancing the night away with just an ordinary bloke in a silly fancy dress?" "I don't know," said Lizzie. "I don't seem to know anything about Miss Wiz anymore." Chapter 3. A Gorgeous, Hunky Lord of the Undead. A low moaning sound could be heard coming from the kitchen when Lizzie and Jack came down to breakfast the following morning. "Oh, no," Lizzie sighed. Mrs. Thompson was sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, staring into a cup of coffee. "Your mum looks really ill," whispered Jack. "It's what's called a hangover," said Lizzie, speaking as loudly as before. "Every year Mum goes to the PTA dance, And every year she has this special PTA dance hangover from drinking too much. Someone must have put something in the wine. I only had 2 glasses, muttered Mrs. Thompson, as she looked up at the children with small, bloodshot eyes. It's called alcohol, Mum, said Lizzie. Where's Miss Wiz? Asked Jack, anxious to change the subject. Flew home after the dance, said Mrs. Thompson. She sipped at her coffee. I think she lost her heart to Dracula. Her heart? Ugh! You mean he just took it? Said Jack. Didn't it make a mess on the dance floor? Mrs. Thompson laughed, then winced. No jokes, she begged. Don't make me laugh. It wasn't really Dracula, was it? Asked Lizzie, thinking of the card she had picked up in the playground. No one knew who he was. Mrs. Thompson stood up slowly. Wasn't a parent, wasn't a teacher. Maybe Miss Wiz thought the PTA dance was a bring-your-own-vampire party. The front doorbell rang loudly. I wonder who that could be, said Lizzie. Mrs. Thompson was tottering towards the stairs. Tell them to go away. I'm off back to bed, she muttered, as Jack and Lizzie ran to the front door. An extraordinary sight greeted their eyes. Miss Wiz, wearing a pink T-shirt covered with purple hearts, was hovering 6 inches above the ground. A cloud of beautiful yellow butterflies flitted around her head. Jack! Lizzie! She exclaimed in a strange, fluting voice. I was passing by and I just wanted to tell you that it's an absolutely wonderful morning. Lizzie held the front door open as Miss Wiz floated into the house, followed by the yellow butterflies. Are you feeling all right, Miss Wiz? Jack asked. Why aren't your feet on the ground? You look all weird. Weird? Moi? Miss Wiz smiled dreamily. I've never felt better in my life. I suppose there aren't any... She fluttered her eyelashes. Messages for me? What sort of messages? Asked Lizzie. You know, little notes written in blood which have been popped through the letterbox. Maybe a present? A dead bat, perhaps, or... From Dracula, you mean? Said Jack. Dracula? Miss Wiz smiled innocently. Everybody knows about you and Dracula, said Lizzie. You were the talk of the PTA dance. Miss Wiz flew around the hall, singing out. My head's in a spin, my heart's on fire, I've fallen in love with a blood-sucking vampire. Miss Wiz, said Jack. We'll stay together, we'll never part. My love for Drax is like a stake through my heart. Miss Wiz, I think, said Lizzie, trying to interrupt. Blood is red, veins are blue, his fangs are pearly and... Miss Wiz, shouted Jack. Stop floating about the hall spouting poetry and just think about this. You cannot fall in love with a vampire. Miss Wiz paused mid-flight. Why not? She smiled. This is the real thing, at last. Yes, but is he a real thing? Asked Lizzie. After all, you did meet him at a fancy dress dance. Maybe he's not a real vampire. Of course he is, Miss Wiz smiled. I'd know a vampire anywhere. Those cute long nails. Those dark, sweet, evil eyes. All right, let's say he is Dracula, said Jack. He's not exactly going to be a perfect boyfriend, is he? I mean, think of all that blood-sucking. After a few nights out with him, your neck would be like a pincushion. Miss Wiz frowned and touched her neck nervously. Then she shrugged. Oh, fiddle-dee-dee, she said. What's a bit of blood-sucking between friends? Then there's the garlic, said Lizzie. When you go out to a restaurant, you'll always have to worry about what's in the meal. Vampires hate garlic. The course of love never did run smooth, smiled Miss Wiz, even with a gorgeous, hunky lord of the undead. And think of Class 3, said Jack desperately. Can you imagine how upset they'll be when they hear you're dating a vampire? That's no problem, said Miss Wiz. You can all come and visit us in Count Dracula's dark, crumbling castle in Transylvania. Lizzie reached into the back pocket of her jeans. She didn't want to upset Miss Wiz, but it was time for a bit of reality. He doesn't actually live in Transylvania, she said. He dropped his card in the playground. The Lord of the Undead seems to live at 43 Addison Gardens. The neighbours must be pleased, muttered Jack. For the first time, Miss Wiz floated down to earth. You have the address of my beloved? She asked faintly. We must go there right now. Promise you won't be disappointed? Asked Lizzie. Take me to my fanged one, said Miss Wiz, hovering by the front door. Lizzie looked at Jack, who shrugged. "Why not?" he said. "Oh, well, it's only 5 minutes away," sighed Lizzie. Picking up her coat, she called up the stairs. "Mum, we're just going down the road with Miss Wiz on a love quest for a blood-sucking vampire. All right?" "Mm-hmm," moaned Mrs. Thompson. 43 Addison Gardens was a block of flats. Beside the door were 6 doorbells with names beside them. None of them was that of Count Dracula. "It must be the top flat," said Miss Wiz. "Vampires are like bats. They live under the roof." "We can't just ring the top bell and ask if Dracula's at home," said Lizzie. "I'll fly up and spy through the window," suggested Miss Wiz. While they were talking, Jack had crept to a nearby window. Now he beckoned them over urgently. Through the window could be seen a small room. A long black cloak had been thrown over a chair near the window. Pacing backwards and forwards was a tall, good-looking man with dark hair and glasses. Now and then he would pause to look at an object on a table nearby. They were a set of false vampire's fangs. "I recognise him," whispered Lizzie. "It's the new school inspector." "You're right," said Jack. "What was his name? Mr. Arnold, that was it. He visited us at the beginning of term." "A school inspector," said Miss Wiz. "I'm afraid so." Lizzie looked at Miss Wiz sympathetically. "He wasn't Dracula after all." "Look on the bright side," said Jack. "There'll be other vampires." A smile had appeared once more on Miss Wiz's face. She floated off the ground, singing out, "Miss Wiz was blind. You were right to correct her. Her heart belongs to a school inspector." "I don't believe it," said Jack. Chapter 4. It's Magic or Me. Ever since Lizzie's father had left home when she was 5, Lizzie had been really close to her mother. She liked seeing her father at weekends, but when it came to the real problems in her life, there was only one person she could talk to. "We've got a crisis, Mum," she said as they sat watching television together a few days later. "People have been seeing Miss Wiz and Mr. Arnold everywhere, at the cinema, feeding the ducks in the park. Podge swears he saw them walking down the high street holding hands." "Nice." Mrs. Thompson was half listening, her eyes on the screen. "I'm so glad he wasn't a real vampire." "But it's not right for Miss Wiz to be hanging around the cinema and the park. It's so normal." "I told you she was lonely," said Mrs. Thompson. "Just because she does a bit of magic now and then, it doesn't mean she's not interested in having a boyfriend." "But you're not interested in having a boyfriend," said Lizzie. "That's because I was married to your father," said Mrs. Thompson, pursing her lips as if she could say more but didn't want to. "He cured me of men." "There's an idea," said Lizzie. "Perhaps I could introduce Dad to Miss Wiz on our next weekend together. Maybe he'd cure her too." Mrs. Thompson laughed. "He couldn't handle a normal person, let alone a paranormal operative with rats, china cats and weird spells." She frowned. "I wonder if Mr. Arnold knows about all that." Lizzie thought about this for a moment. Then she leapt to her feet. "Mum, you're a genius," she said, making for the door. "Where are you going?" asked Mrs. Thompson. "I'm phoning Jack," Lizzie called over her shoulder. "I've just thought of a solution to our crisis." Brian Arnold walked down the high street, which was packed with Christmas shoppers. Smiling, he whistled softly to himself. He didn't think he had ever been so happy in his life. It had been a matter of sheer luck that he had gone to the St. Barnabas dance. He had only accepted Mr. Gilbert's invitation out of politeness. Yet there, as if by magic, he had met the most beautiful woman in the world. Yes, it really was as if by magic, he had said to Miss Wiz on their first date together 2 days after the dance. "It wasn't magic, it was life," Miss Wiz had replied, with the merest hint of irritation in her voice. "Magic had nothing to do with it." Mr. Arnold had never discovered why the word magic seemed to upset her so much. There was another wonderful thing. Mr. Arnold loved children. That was why he had become a school inspector. But until recently, he had rarely been friends with them outside school hours. Ever since he had met Miss Wiz, he always seemed to be meeting children from Class 3. It was almost as if they were following him. In fact, he was seeing some children this very afternoon. Jack and Lizzie had invited him out for a Christmas hamburger at the Big Burger Bar on the high street. Miss Wiz had promised to meet them there. "A lovely girlfriend, children offering me a Christmas hamburger?" Mr. Arnold smiled to himself as he opened the door of the Big Burger Bar. "What a lucky man I am." Jack and Lizzie were already sipping cokes at a corner table. "This was an excellent idea," he said as he took his seat. "Mum said we could buy you burgers as a sort of Christmas present," smiled Lizzie. "Very decent of you," said Mr. Arnold. "I wonder where Dolores has got to." "Dolores?" Jack frowned. "Oh, you mean Miss Wiz? She'll probably fly in on her vacuum cleaner, just like she did when we first met her at St. Barnabas." "Vacuum cleaner?" The school inspector smiled politely. "How exactly can someone fly on a vacuum cleaner?" "The same way as someone can turn Podge's father into a warthog, or Mr. Gilbert into a sheep," said Jack. "If that someone happens to have magic powers like Miss Wiz has—" "Excuse me, children." Mr. Arnold cleared his throat nervously. "Are you telling me that Dolores, Miss Wiz, is not quite as other women?" "Of course she's not," said Jack. "You mean she's never told you? She calls herself a paranormal operative. It's a sort of modern witch." He pulled a small bottle from his pocket. "This little bottle had my appendix in it after I had an operation at the hospital. That is, until Mr. Bailey, my teacher, ate it, thanks to a bit of Miss Wiz magic." "And she's got this rat she keeps under her shirt," said Lizzie. "It ran up the leg of the last school inspector's trousers during a lesson." Mr. Arnold nodded slowly. "So that was why Mr. Smith left the job in such a hurry. When I was given his job, I was told he had problems with his nerves." "Hi, everyone." Lizzie, Jack and Mr. Arnold turned to see Miss Wiz waving as she made her way across the restaurant towards them. "What's the matter?" she said as she arrived. "You all look as if you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," said Mr. Arnold grimly, "but a paranormal operative." "Ah." Miss Wiz sat down slowly. "You've heard. Jack and Lizzie have been telling me all about your spells." "Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Lizzie." Miss Wiz picked up the menu as if nothing unusual had happened. "Now, I wonder if they have anything vegetarian here," she said. "Dolores, I must ask you a question." Mr. Arnold sat forward in his seat. "Do you, or do you not, keep a magic rat in your underwear?" A faint humming sound came from across the table. "Oh, look!" Miss Wiz pointed behind them. "Flying hamburgers!" There were gasps from the diners as hamburgers floated off their plates to swoop around the restaurant, splashing relish, mayonnaise, and tomato sauce everywhere. "Isn't that strange, Brian?" But Mr. Arnold ignored the hamburgers. "You're just making it worse by trying to put me off with some sort of conjuring trick," he said. "Tell me about the rat. Do you—" A crash of plates, followed by the thud of bodies hitting the ground, interrupted him. "That's odd, Brian," said Miss Wiz desperately. "The floor of the restaurant has been changed into an ice rink. Those poor waiters are falling all over the place." "The rat, Dolores," said Mr. Arnold. As the humming noise died down, the flying hamburgers settled back onto their plates, and the waiters picked themselves up off the floor. Miss Wiz sighed and reached inside her T-shirt, pulling out a small brown rat which she put on the table. "Tell him, Herbert," she said. "It's very simple," said the rat in a squeaky but well-educated voice. "My name is Herbert, and I am indeed a magic rat. I would like to take this opportunity to apologise profusely for running up your former colleague's trousers." There was a scream from a nearby table. "A rat!" With a trembling hand, a woman pointed to Herbert. "And it's talking!" Yeah, said Herbert, glancing casually in her direction. "Now, as I was saying..." Mr. Arnold had heard enough. He pushed back his chair and stood up. "That's it, Dolores," he said to Miss Wiz. "Call me old-fashioned, but I'm not going out with someone who makes hamburgers fly off plates and goes around with talking rats in her undergarments." He backed towards the door. "You have to choose, Dolores. It's magic or me." Without another word, he blundered out of the door and into the street outside. "Whoops," said Jack. "I'm sorry, Miss Wiz." Lizzie laid a hand on Miss Wiz's arm. "We shouldn't have told him about your magic." "Never mind." Miss Wiz smiled bravely. "He had to find out sometime." She sighed. "Oh, well, there goes my Christmas Day with Mr. Arnold." She picked up Herbert and slipped him back under her T-shirt. "Why don't you come round to us?" asked Lizzie. "Mum and I would love to see you." "And I could bring your friends from Class 3 around in the afternoon," said Jack. Miss Wiz was staring out of the window, as if looking for Mr. Arnold. "That would be lovely," she said quietly. Chapter 5. The Last Spell of Christmas. "A party for Miss Wiz this afternoon? All her friends from Class 3 there?" said Podge's father, Mr. Harris, on Christmas morning. "No way. Yuletide is a time for families, not weird green-eyed women with magic powers." "But, Dad," Podge pleaded, "everyone's going to be there. For Class 3, Miss Wiz is family. Lizzie and Jack says she needs cheering up." "She's always been trouble, Miss Who's-it," said Mr. Harris. "What do you think, Mother?" Mrs. Harris placed a hand on her son's shoulders. "I think that if you don't let him go, you'll be cooking your own turkey," she said firmly. "Typical," grumbled Mr. Harris. "Not even Christmas is safe from that woman." Miss Wiz sat at the head of Mrs. Thompson's table, her pale face illuminated by the Christmas tree nearby. "This is the best Christmas I've ever had," she said quietly. "Before we have tea, I'd just like to thank Lizzie and Mrs. Thompson for inviting me for Christmas dinner, and to all my friends in Class 3 for coming to tea." She looked around the table at the smiling faces of Lizzie, Jack, Podge, Caroline, Katrina, Carl and Nabila. "Seeing you all again has reminded me of all the strange adventures we've had together." "But we'll be having more adventures in the future, won't we, Miss Wiz?" asked Katrina. Before Miss Wiz could answer, Mrs. Thompson appeared at the doorway, carrying a large cake, which she put down carefully in the middle of the table. Written in green on the cake's white icing were the words, "Happy Christmas, Miss Wiz." "I don't know how to thank you," said Miss Wiz. "What about a trick?" suggested Jack. "Yeah," the children agreed. "Trick, trick, trick," they chanted. Miss Wiz held up her hands. "I have an announcement to make," she said when silence had returned to the room. "After my recent experiences with a certain school inspector, I've decided I want to lead a more normal life. Of course, that experience is over, but all the same, I plan to get a flat somewhere around here. I'll be applying for a job as a teacher." "Great," said Carl. "We can have magic every day." "Well, no," Miss Wiz smiled. "The only way that I can become part of the normal world is to agree to give up magic." There was a stunned silence. "How exactly do you give up magic?" Nabila asked shyly. "Is there a strange ceremony with lots of Latin and chanting?" Miss Wiz laughed. "All I have to do is—" She was interrupted by the sound of 3 loud knocks coming from the hall. Mrs. Thompson frowned. "Who on earth could that be?" she said. There was silence as she walked out of the room to open the front door, followed by a blood-curdling scream. The children stared at the sitting-room door. First they saw a shadow, then a dark, cloaked figure filled the doorway, its fangs shining in the gloom. "Yes?" The voice coming from the figure was like ghostly wind rustling the leaves of an ancient oak tree. "I am Dracula." He moved slowly towards the table. "I have heard that the Brotherhood of Vampires has been mocked by one pretending to be the Lord of the Undead. Is this true?" Nobody answered. "Those who have laughed at the undead shall pay a terrible price," the stranger continued. "Is that you, Mr. Arnold?" Lizzie managed to say at last. It was as if Dracula had heard nothing. "First to pay," the dark figure fixed its eyes upon Miss Wiz, "will be the woman who actually danced with the pretender." Miss Wiz stood up slowly. "What do you want of me?" she asked quietly. "All I want," Dracula sneered evilly as he moved more closely. "All I want." "Get some garlic from the kitchen, Mum," Lizzie said to Mrs. Thompson. "We need to save Miss Wiz before it's too late." "All I want for Christmas is my 2 front teeth." With a pale hand, Dracula reached up to his mouth and removed his fangs. "Happy Christmas, Dolores," he said. "Eh?" muttered Jack. "What's going on?" Dracula took off his cloak, smiled and put on a pair of glasses. "I don't believe it," said Lizzie. "It was Mr. Arnold all the time." "A vampire for Christmas," said Miss Wiz, her eyes sparkling. "Just what I always wanted." "Honestly," said Mrs. Thompson. "Calls himself a school inspector, and he comes round on Christmas Day to scare the living daylights out of children. This man's almost as odd as Miss Wiz." "It's why we get on so well," said Miss Wiz. "I just had to say I'm sorry about walking out of the big burger bar," said Mr. Arnold. "All those spells took me by surprise." "Hey," said Caroline, "now Mr. Arnold's back, you won't have to give up your magic." As if in reply, a faint humming sound filled the room. The lights lifted off the Christmas tree, hovered in the air, then made an archway over Miss Wiz. "Listen to me, Class 3, she said, stretching her arms out in front of her. On this Christmas Day, we are faced with a choice. If you wish me to live in your neighbourhood so that you can see me every day, I shall have to retire from being a paranormal operative. You have to decide whether you like me for my magic or for myself." "For yourself," said the children. "But the magic helps," muttered Jack. Miss Wiz reached into her coloured canvas bag that was nearby. She took out Hecate, her enchanted china cat, and placed it on the table. "As from now, this is but a normal china cat," she said. She reached into her T-shirt and took out her magic rat Herbert. She gave him to Jack. "That," she said as Herbert ran up Jack's arm to perch on his shoulder, "is now but an ordinary pet rat. And I—" The humming noise faded. The lights returned slowly to the Christmas tree. "As from today, I'll just be Dolores Wisdom. Only in real emergencies will I become Miss Wiz again." She smiled first at Mr. Arnold, who stood beside her, and then at the children. "Any questions?" There was silence. "Just one," said Podge at last. "Are we ever going to eat that Christmas cake?" Laughing, Mrs. Thompson passed Miss Wiz a knife. Everyone clapped as she cut the first slice. "I say," a voice whispered in Jack's ear, "I'd be most awfully grateful if you slipped us a piece of that cake." It was Herbert the rat. Miss Wiz," said Jack quietly, "I think the magic is still—" Miss Wiz looked up and winked. "Still what, Jack?" Nothing, Dolores," said Jack.